good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The passage of time will now bring you to something strange, unique, and idiosyncratic. Have a good time.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. I am your host, Jenn the Rage Adams, and we have a treat for you. It's October, there's a chill in the air, and I'm longing for something really, really scary. Which is good because today we are talking about one of King's scariest novels. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of the publication of his sophomore novel, today we are doing a twinner episode on Salem's Lot. The pod knows darkness, and so does this panel, helping me keep the pod secrets. From the corn mazes of Idaho, Rachel, say hello and tell us, would you let a vampire bite you?
Hey, it's Rachel Jahoobies Reeves. We got some Jahoobies.
We got double Jahoobies, yes.
as
I mean, of course, yes.
You know, one would hope and
This is
dream
not
of.
Total Recall.
Yeah. Would I let a vampire bite me? Great question. Are they the vampires in this story? Do I get to pick what kind?
Yes,
of
you can
vampires?
pick what vampire, yes.
Because, you know, there's some certain vampires that seem to have it pretty good. Like, there's a lot of places in the world I haven't been that I would like to go. I would, and being a vampire, it seems like an awesome way to be able to travel and see all the sights and things. So if we're talking about a more, like, what's that movie? Tilda Swinton and Lovers.
Only Lovers Left Alive?
Yeah, like maybe something kind of like that where you're just sort of living life and just like, oh, so bored because I've seen everything. Like maybe that. A Twilight vampire, honestly, wouldn't be that bad, I would imagine.
Yeah.
These vampires, I don't know. I don't think I'm interested in this kind of vampire because this life doesn't really seem enjoyable. So TBD, I guess. Yeah. But there is an appeal, obviously. Getting to experience and just the timeless nature of it all. I would even vote for being a What We Do in the Shadows vampire, you know? They seem to have a lot of fun. And every once in a while, you get to take those real long naps. And that sounds great.
And if you eat somebody who's been on drugs, you're a wizard, too. So that's fun. Now, would you let Tilda Swinton bite you as a vampire because she was Ambrosius on The Boys, the voice of the octopus who fucks the deep? Is that why you're choosing Tilda Swinton as your vampire biter?
You found me out. How did you know?
It goes all the way to the top. Well, from the dark streets of Chicago, Dan, say hello and tell us, would you let a vampire bite you? And if so, who?
Well, this is Dan Pfleegor.
Ooh.
I always thought that was such a funny term, a familiar. I'm like, wait, so like you know the guy? But I guess it has some kind of deeper appeal. And yes, I would let Jamie Gertz from The Lost Boys, a.k.a. Star, bite me. Mm-hmm. I had such a crush on her. And now she's literally a billionaire. She owns a sports team. So
what?
It wouldn't be so bad to have her be, you know, my master.
What team does she own? Do we know?
She married into it, some kind of stock guy. But yeah, she's like a straight up billionaire now, which is pretty cool.
Well, then she dodged a bullet when she didn't marry Bill Paxton from Twister also. So
yeah, I'll say. I can imagine he would be tricky to be married to, but he would be fun too.
But he's a nice guy, you know.
You get divorced and he's like, game over.
Game over, dude. Yeah. Exactly.
And then Gertz.
He like throws a truck at you from the sky, you know. Well, Dan, would you let these vampires bite you?
No, these are like the Nosferatu, like ratty vampires.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They don't have like the appeal. Like even, I think like the Familiar seemed more charming, which is funny because I picture like from the original Dracula story, like the Familiar kind of being like out of his head and like eating bugs, whereas this, he is like a pretty charming, sophisticated continental gentleman.
Mm-hmm. Erudite.
Yes, very much.
Yes, quite so. I think I would let a vampire bite me. Like, I was thinking about that while writing this or reading this book. I might even let these vampires bite me. Maybe Bill Pullman from the remake, because I do like him. I don't necessarily like that remake, and his hair is a little too long and greasy.
Wait, is his son? Lewis
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wait, did I say Bill Pullman or Lewis Pullman?
Bill.
I mean, Bill Pullman. Too.
I will let Bill Pullman bite me too, because
What's
this
funny
is
is
our
people always
Independence
mix
Day,
up Pullman Paxton. That's like a thing online, and now you're mixing up Pullman Paxton.
Well, when we're all vampires, it doesn't matter anymore.
We're all family in the in the coffin. We're all family.
That's true. But I mean, you know who I would let bite me? It's
Skarsgård.
Skarsgård, Eric Northman,
True
of
blood.
course.
Yes.
We all saw that one coming.
I mean, yeah, that may or may not be the reason I asked that question. But
gotta get scars in there somehow.
Gotta get a scars in there. Yeah, everybody mark your bingo cards. Well, let's talk about this book, which sadly does not feature a Skarsgård, but I may be asking you who you would cast a Skarsgård as. Stay tuned. Let's talk about first introductions. Okay, so I joked before we hit record that this was my first read. It is not. I've read this many times. I think we've all read this before, right? Okay.
I think so.
Dan, when was the first time you read Salem's Lot, and what edition did you read this time?
So I read this pretty close. I've told my Stephen King journey before, but it started with The Dark Tower, immediately segued to The Stand, It, and then I was like, what is the next most popular novel? I might have snuck Pet Sematary in, but I definitely got Salem's Lot in like 2006 or 7. So 19 years, oddly. And I have the Signet copy, the New American Library. I think it's first edition paperback. And you can see it's very well loved. The cover is off. It has like the sort of embossed face of a vampire. Very cool edition, though.
Yeah, I have that edition, or at least I stole it from my dad, and it is falling apart like that too. Yeah, I feel like mine had little blood drops, and that was like the only color on it, either the front or the back, right?
Yeah, it's almost like that stamp that like a notary would give it, where it's like has like a texture to it, but and then there's just like a single drop of blood. I was showing my girlfriend earlier, and she's like, "Oh wow, all black cover," and I was like, "No, look a little closer."
And Cujo is similar. There's a similar Cujo cover, the paperback. I think it may be brown, and it's just like the drool or something.
There's
which
also
is the only drool I will accept.
Yeah, there's a version of the cut stand that also has like Flag's face just floating on it.
Yes,
almost like Vigo the Carpathian, like just detached.
I love Vigo. I'm not going to talk about how that's the best Ghostbuster movie because I talk about it too much. Rachel, what about you? Was this the first time you read Salem's Lot, and what edition did you read this time?
This is not the first time I've read it. It's actually not even the first time I've read it this year.
Wow.
Because I did not do the math and realize that we'd be covering it again. So I read it earlier this year because it had been a minute. So I think I've read it maybe 4 times now. So not too crazy as far as King rereads go. The first time I read it, though, it was, I don't know, probably it was a little bit later. It wasn't like one of the first King books I tackled. I'm a crazy person. I've told that The Talisman was my first King book. And so it's kind of amazing that I kept reading. But I didn't read this till, I don't know, 2010, something like that. So fairly recently, I was knocking out a lot of the other big heavy hitters. And for some reason, I don't know. I do know. I know what it is. Because my first introduction to Salem's Lot was the Rob Lowe miniseries.
Yeah.
And I think that, unfortunately, I was like, okay, I know what this is. I can wait. And so I kind of put it on the back burner a little bit and knocked out, Pet Sematary and The Shining and was crossing all these others off my list and then finally got around to reading it. And what do you know? Maybe you shouldn't judge this book by the Rob Lowe TV adaptation from 2004. Although, you know what? There's some good points about that I do like because there's some certain characters that I can't get out of my head from that adaptation. We can talk about that later. But yeah, so this is my 4th read. And then I did listen to the audiobook this time for a majority of it, which is also a great audiobook.
Yeah. Ron McClarty, I think, reads it. Yeah.
And
it
is great.
I completely agree. I've listened to this audiobook many times. I've said before, I think before I discovered podcasts, I listened to early Stephen King audiobooks. This was one of them that was in rotation for me because it's so like, it's long enough to be substantial, but it's short enough to not feel overwhelming. You know, it's just a really, really nice length to it.
I gotta say, I've done the audiobook as well, and for a book that has a lot of characters in it, he does a good job of kind of distinguishing the voices, because sometimes, and I'll talk about it later, but I almost think there's too many characters that are running onto each other, especially toward the race at the end. So
yeah, no, I agree with you. And, you know, we are going to mention that Rob Lowe miniseries later just for a little bit. We do have episodes on that too. So if you are a fan or, you know, not, go back and check out our thoughts. But I think the best thing that one does is the casting. There are some really, really great casting choices in that, you know, not everybody, but some of them I do still picture when I'm reading. I remember I tried to read this earlier because my dad had this on the shelf, and you know, when I did the same thing as you, Dan, except not with The Dark Tower. Once I read The Stand, I was like, well, what else can I get my hands on? What else is on my dad's shelf? And I remember picking this up and getting through the introduction and then getting to the section in the park, and I was like, this is so fucking 70s. Like, I can't do it. It's so melodramatic, and just putting it down. And then I don't remember when I went back to it, but I remember picking it up probably 5 or 6 years later, and probably after I'd read quite a few more and was just kind of looking for the next thing and just falling in love with it because it's just so good, you know, and it's so readable. And I think once I got past, I may have just started at that place in the park. And yeah, so I've come back to this a lot over the years, and I may have said this on the pod before too, but when Corey and I started dating, he lived in a different town that I would judge a little bit. And so it was kind of like a long drive when we would come hang out with each other. And I knew that he liked me because he was listening to this on his drive back and forth because he wasn't a Stephen King fan. And I was like, you should check out this one, you know, and it's still his favorite Stephen King book too. So
that's sweet. Someone takes an interest in yours.
Right. Exactly. It's one of those early things, like the way he knew I liked him, he will say, is because I texted him and I was like, I think I'm going to quit smoking. That's what he wanted me to do. And I knew that I wanted him to read Stephen King. And, you know, the rest is history going on.
I got into The Nanny once for romantic relationship, and I really liked it.
Oh, okay.
Nanny, sorry.
I was like, what nanny are we talking?
I did not date the nanny.
Started dating the nanny?
The nanny?
The Fran Drescher.
Oh, okay. I was like, that doesn't sound like the start of a good relationship. But The Nanny, that's sweet. I've never actually watched The Nanny, but I like a loud broad, you know. There are a couple of them in this story, so let's talk about it in our next category, the legacy.
Mike Hanlon, if you see...
Excuse me, sir. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
Tell Mike Hanlon that I had to go, that I had to get cleaned up. Tell him I'll see him tonight.
Get out! Last chance, Doja. Get out! Get out!
And so let's start with the origins of Salem's Lot. Per Bev Vincent, Stephen King, a complete exploration of his work, life, and influences, Salem's Lot was unsurprisingly born from King's love for Bram Stoker's Dracula, which he first read when he was 11 years old.
How?
I
don't know. That's heavy.
That's a heavy book. I know. The story is fantastic. I've had, like, as a grown up, I've had a hard time reading it with my eyes. The only way I could get through it was to listen to it.
Wasn't his mother like a librarian or a teacher?
I think
English teacher.
I can't remember. I know she was a reading enthusiast because
so I could see her definitely pushing the classics on young Stevie.
Well, and when, we're talking about like 50s, 60s too, so it's not like there was a whole lot of like R.L. Stein or Stephen King to read, so like the classics probably seemed a lot more accessible, but still 11 years old, that's just the epistolary format, So he began teaching it when he led an elective high school course called Fantasy and Science Fiction. One night, he and Tabby had Chris Chesley, a childhood friend, over, and they began chatting about what it might look like if Dracula appeared in America in the 1970s. And this is from a 1983 talk at the Massachusetts Public Library. Okay. With Salem's Lot, I was teaching Dracula in high school. I taught it 3 or 4 times, and every time I taught it, I got more interested in what a really strong novel it was. We were talking about it with a friend one night at supper, and I said, "This is the magic question. What would happen if Dracula came back today?" And my wife said, "Well, he'd land at Port Authority in New York and get run over by a taxi cab, and that'd be the end of him." And then this friend of mine said, "But suppose he came back to a little town somewhere inland in Maine. You know, you go through some of these little towns, and everybody could be dead, and you'd never know it." Anyway, every now and then before I fell asleep, after I'd made sure my feet were under the covers, I love that, this idea would rise back up, and I'd think about it for a while and then put it away. And finally, the story kind of crystallized, and I had to write it. So according to Vincent, King felt a contemporary setting would work in the vampire's favor because electric lights and modern inventions would actually aid the incubus by rendering belief in him all but impossible. So we just kind of alluded to whether we read Dracula, but are we fans of Dracula? And do you think about Dracula when you read this?
I
I'll go.
Okay,
man.
Go, Dan.
Again, Midwest standoff.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I actually read it every year. I'm
Really?
in Dracula Daily, which is, it gives you an email of, because it's like the epistolatory novel. So on the date of like the article being published, I get an email with that article just right to my email. So there'll be like chunks of time in between. Yeah, I signed up for it a few years ago and I just never unsubscribed. So it's just every year I get it. And it's, it's a quick email because most of it is just like Harkin's journal entry. But I would recommend it. It's ramping up toward the end at this point.
Holy shit.
But then they restart.
Is it free?
Yeah, it's totally free. Dracula Daily. It's great.
Dracula
I think I've talked
Daily.
about it on the podcast before, but it's a great way to kind of, check off a couple of pages here and there. And then there's like spaces of weeks sometimes where you just won't get anything. So, but yeah, I'd read it also as like an actual novel, like, tactile in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan. So is Dan Caffrey, I know.
Dan Dracula Caffrey?
Dan Dracula
that's right.
Caffrey.
Rachel, what about you?
I have read it, but it was a painful experience, to be honest. I felt it's one of those that this was like my pre-medicated ADHD days. So it's like I read it, but I actually don't know how much of it I remember because I was pretty checked out for some of it. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I need to go back. It's just such like a dense kind of slog sometimes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I don't feel like I fully gave it the chance it deserves. So I'm loving this Dracula Daily way of approaching it. But I can't help but think of Dracula when I read this. And I love that because I love seeing it sort of through his lens and being able to have that as a reference point. Mm-hmm. And of course, Dracula is a story that's been told 8 bazillion times. Yeah. And so being able to bring all that into context and see which different kinds of Dracula he's talking about, or even like the little nods when he's talking about like, oh, she's seen all these Hammer horror movies. And so just, I don't know, all of his little nuggets making references to all the various incarnations of Dracula. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I have tried to read Dracula many times before. I even had an annotated copy that had a lot of like footnotes and stuff in it, which I still have it because I think it's really cool. Like it's one of those books that just feels really weighty in your hands and you like to flip through it. But I have only been able to finish reading the audiobook. And I did really enjoy the audiobook. I think the epistolary format works well because it's all just written in a like kind of a speaking voice kind of thing. So I like that. The story of Dracula is incredible, but I struggle with the format now. Bram Stoker's Dracula.
May I mention just so it starts May 3rd and it ends November 7th every year, and they just cycle it now. So
that is so cool. Okay, well, we might try to link that in the show notes because that is really, really cool.
And can I just say one thing too? Like it made me think a lot more of the present day Nosferatu one, the Eggers film, because of that like focus on this sort of disgusting, whereas Dracula is not quite as gross in the novel, I don't think, as much. Like because a lot of it is he's young and courting. Whereas this one, I feel like they really got like the diseased nature of vampirism.
Yeah, well, he's Gary Oldman, He's.
Oh, I meant like the Nosferatu, that one also, but
yeah. No, I know what you mean.
Your boy, Skarsgård.
My Skarsgård boy. Yes, exactly.
Orlok, just his voice. I'm doing everything I can not to throw my voice out by impersonating it. But.
It will really fuck your voice up. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's funny too, and I kind of wanted to ask this, but it felt too leading For me, Salem's Lot is the definitive vampire story now. And it could just be because I'm so immersed in King, but that and because it is a more modern story, it feels like it is set in a much more recognizable time period. And, you know, nothing will ever overtake Dracula. And, you know, we always have the Simpsons version of it too. So, but yeah, this one feels like the definitive vampire story for me, the one that I come back to for my lore, you know. Well, let's talk about Salem's Lot. This is from On Writing Salem's Lot. So King began writing it in 1972 when it was called Second Coming, though he later changed the title because Tabby said it sounded like a sex manual. And he talked about his kind of adorable writing process in a 1983 interview with Playboy. Dan, would you mind reading this segment?
Sure. In the fall of 1971, I finally got a job as an English instructor at Hampden Academy, just across from the Pembascot River from Bangor. But it was
audiobooks listeners will know it's Penobscot.
Penobscot.
That is the benefit of an audiobook too, is you get all those pronunciations.
Never actually heard that out loud, but it only paid $6,400 a year, barely more than I had been earning before. In fact, I had to go back and moonlight in the laundry just to keep our heads above water. We were living in a trailer on top of a bleak, snow-swept hillside in Herman, Maine, which is not the asshole of the universe. It's at least the farting distance from it. I'd come home exhausted from school and squat in the trailer's furnace room with Tabby's little Olvete portable perched on a child's desk. I had to balance on my knees and try to hammer out some scintilla of prose. That's where I wrote Salem's Lot, actually. It was my second published book, but the bulk of the writing was completed before Carrie was even accepted by Doubleday. And believe me, after a day of teaching and then coming home and watching Tabby gamely juggle her way through a mountain of unpaid bills, it was a positive pleasure to squeeze into the cramped furnace room and do a little battle with the horde of bloodthirsty vampires. Compared to our creditors, they were a fucking relief.
Oh, I'm sure Tabby enjoyed it.
It's very funny.
Would go into the thing and let her deal with all the bills. Yeah, isn't that funny? I love the asshole of the world or farting distance. So he finished the draft the day before he got the call from Carrie's paperback deal, netting him hundreds of thousands, which is nuts. But do we think Tabby is right? Does Second Coming sound like a sex manual? I say yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Especially in the 70s, you know?
And it doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't have any sort of, like, I get that, like, okay, the, like, religious sort of connotations to that. I can understand that. And obviously, I think that that plays into a lot of the themes of the book. So I see where he's coming from with that. But I also hate it. And I think, God, thank God for Tabitha King. Can we, like, I know that we talk about her all the time, but she will never get enough praise and recognition and credit, because how many times, even we've made it like how long into this podcast, and we've already mentioned it twice. I mentioned her twice, and her sort of just help with these sort of things. The fact that she was like, oh, well, you know, what would happen if Dracula came back today? He'd get run over by a taxi cab and that kind of idea. And he put that in the book, right? And then this too, like, she's just a blessing.
Yeah, and even Carrie being mentioned here, like her impact, as we've discussed a million times, like,
it's just
I'm just getting this forward. And yeah, not calling it Second Coming, I agree. Like, I would think that'd be religious or a sex manual, but also it kind of goes against the theme of the book, because he's been coming even since before Christianity. He's this ancient creature, so it's not like this is his second appearance.
All humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it does explicitly tie it to Dracula too, because I think what he probably has in mind is the second coming of Dracula. You know, this is my iteration of the vampire story. Especially when we're talking about if Dracula had a second coming in Maine. And so I like that he is distancing it, because while the structure is similar, the fundamental story is similar, this completely stands on its own, you know, and you don't need to understand Dracula to understand the story.
Yeah. And also having Salem in the title, like, that's a word that we associate with, like, spookiness and witchcraft.
And
and then, like, the fact that it becomes it's named after a pig.
Right,
Jerusalem.
exactly.
But it nonetheless, the title is still, like, will bring you in.
Right. It's so evocative, you know. And, you know, ballsy to start your title with an apostrophe too, you know. So. So, in a 1980 interview with the Tampa Tribune, King talked about some of the arguments he had with his Doubleday editor, Bill Thompson. Rachel, would you mind reading this?
Sure. He says, well, I was convinced in my own mind that it was vampires from the word go in Salem's Lot. My editor suggested that we rewrite the book a little bit in the beginning to try and keep the reader in the dark for a certain period of time. And I said, come on, anybody who reads this sort of thing is going to know it's vampires from the first sign. And he kind of slammed me one on the back. And he said, you're not writing for a weird tales audience, Steve. Don't get the idea that you're writing for an audience of 40,000 people. We want to break you out so that you'll appeal to an audience of millions of people, and they don't read weird tales. So come on and do it my way. And I did. And he was right.
Nice. Which I just love the idea that he had to clarify that he didn't like body slam him or like throw him over the top ring. You know, he just slammed me on the back, you know.
On the back.
So do we agree? And does the supernatural element feel ambiguous at all? Because for me, this is one of the ones that's really easy to describe. It's like, well, Christine's about the car. Cujo's about the dog. This one's about vampires. But we just mentioned Salem's Lot. Like that kind of makes me think about witches if I didn't know anything about the story. So does it feel supernatural, and can we imagine it more overt from the very beginning, you know, like the vampire sucked blood in the darkness on the first page, you know?
I don't think it sounds supernatural. I think he did do a good job of following that advice, because in the beginning, it's just like you get this slice of life of New England town. And I think this is early King is what he does so well. When you're opening up and you're hearing like the daily lives of these people, and it's a little overwhelming because you're like, well, there's too many characters already, but he's just giving you like a snapshot into their life. And it's almost like this omniscient camera floating around, and you just get this real sense of the place. You feel the weather. You just feel like everything's a little, you know, there's something going on beneath the surface. We don't know what it is yet, but it could be criminal. It could be, who knows? But I don't think it's overtly vampire. It reminds me a lot of the beginning of Needful Things, in fact, where you're like, someone's coming to town. We don't really understand what's going on, but it's about more the townsfolk and how they interact with one another.
Mm-hmm. Well, and hold that thought, because we're going to talk about Needful Things in just a minute. What do you think, Rachel?
Oh, I agree. And I think it was smart. And I think his editor was right. Like, who are you writing for? Are you writing for the weirdos, or are you writing for a bigger audience? Like, you have to, you know, I don't know, think bigger. And I like the supernatural element. I like that it does feel ambiguous. It's hard to like think of a time where I didn't know this is vampires. Mm-hmm. But the fact, like, even with the Glick boys and all of that, like, it's not, I don't think there's anything specifically that's letting you know that it's vampires. Like, it's kind of these hints that are dropping, and then just like the characters kind of put all these pieces together, like, no, this is fucking vampires. Mm-hmm. You can't explain your way or reason your way out of any other possible solution. Like, you know, eventually if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Yeah. And that's kind of this thing. But I do like how it eases into it, because it also just helps add to the whole eeriness of it, add to the uncertainty, adds to the characters' uncertainty. So it benefits the stories in more ways than just as the reader easing us into it. It actually benefits the characters too, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just kind of flipping through. It feels like it's about, because I think the point where you cannot pretend it's anything but vampires, where it's overt vampires, is Danny Glick in the window. Because even then, when they're in the woods, it could still be a prevert, or, you know, or quicksand, or, you know, a ghost or something. But I think once we get to Danny and then Mike Ryerson, it is clearly vampires. And that's like 130 pages into the story. So I guess it's just, I can't divorce it from vampires in my mind. It's always like, well, I want to read about vampires, so I'm reading Salem's Lot, you know. And it is now the story that I think about when I think about reading a vampire story, you know. So let's talk about influences. So according to Vincent, King's 3 touchstones for Salem's Lot were Dracula, obviously, but also Thornton Wilder's Our Town and Grace Metalius's, I think, Peyton Place. So I have not seen Our Town, but I have seen My So-Called Life a whole bunch of times, and they do Our Town in My So-Called Life, and it's really sad. And then I don't think I've read Peyton Place. Have y'all read or seen either of those?
I've seen Our Town, but I'm not familiar with Peyton Place. I've seen the title, but I have no idea what it could be about.
I have that. Peyton Place, I have always heard about. I think it reminds me kind of like a different version of Valley of the Dolls. It's like that era, except it's like a soap town. It's like if this town didn't have vampires, if it was just people cheating on each other or,
So kind of like Desperate Housewives, sort of?
Yes, but like 60s, I think it's the 60s. I have it, but I haven't read it yet. So, maybe check back in 50 years when we do our triplet episode on Salem's Lot. But he elaborated in a 1979 interview with Yankee Magazine. I was teaching Dracula here at Hamden Academy. I was also teaching Thornton Wilder's Our Town in freshman English. I was moved by what he had to say about the town. The town is something that doesn't change. People come and go, but the town remains. I could really identify with the nature of a very small town. I grew up in Durham, Maine, a really small town. I went to a one-room schoolhouse. I graduated at the top of my grammar class, but there were only 3 of us. We had an 8-party line. You could always count on the heavy breathing of the fat old lady up the street when you talked to your girlfriend on the phone. There was a lot of love in that town, but there was a lot of nastiness too. I was thinking about Dracula a lot. I was thinking about our town. It always seemed when I taught Dracula that Stoker wanted to make science and rationalism triumphant over superstition, but Stoker wrote his book at the turn of the century. I started mine when I'd seen all the flies on modern science. It doesn't look so great anymore when you can see spray cans dissipating the ozone layer and modern biology bringing us such neat things as nerve gas and the neutron bomb. So I said, I'll change things around. In my novel, superstition will triumph. In this day and age, compared to what is really there, superstition seems almost comforting. So I want to talk about the town element in just a minute, but considering what we were just talking about with Dracula, does superstition overtake science here, or is it the other way around? Does this feel like a scientific novel or a superstitious novel?
Oh, man, that's tough. I feel like, especially with Callahan, like they do question about like sort of faith versus science. Mm-hmm. So there definitely is like there are issues of that. And even like when they're doing research, they're getting books on vampires from the library, which I'd imagine would be in the fiction section.
Yeah.
So I think the novel does a good job of grappling with that because, like, you can't deny, like, this guy is real and he is a vampire. But then you have all these old folk remedies and, folklore, but it actually works against him. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I think it kind of goes – I don't know if I would take one over the other.
Yeah.
It definitely – the superstition, I like how it does overtake in the sense that eventually, like, all the scientific – elements, they're ruled out. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, science can't explain away. Science can't explain what's happening. And eventually you have to turn to something that would be labeled as superstitious or, mythical or fictional, like something made up that eventually science fails in a way. Like, okay, this system we have set up, and obviously I think that'll play into some larger themes that we'll probably touch on later. But just this system that we've had this set of beliefs in is failing us here, and we have no choice but to look elsewhere. And in this case, that means that we have to believe or look at the possibility that, like, shit, this is vampires.
Yeah.
Damn.
Well, and it feels kind of like a pendulum swing, too. I think he is smart to point out the time periods when these were written, too, because I think when Dracula was written, it felt like the revolutionary thing to go against the superstitions and embrace the scientific explanations for things. And here, it's not so much that it's science, but it feels like practicality, like with Jimmy Cody. He's like, well, I am going to make a tongue depressor cross, that's going to work. And I'm going to go examine the body. And then he's able to kind of hydrocortisone cream or like, what's the acid shit that you always pour on a scrape and it hurts a lot? Like, that's how he disinfects the bite. So there is kind of a mix here. But I always come back to this moment where Susan is talking to Mark and she's like, well, you just believed it was vampires? And he was like, yeah, I fucking saw a vampire. It's vampires, And then the amount of labor we have to go through to believe Matt, too, and how he is completely fine with it, too. He's like, I understand you think I'm lying or I'm crazy. What can I do to prove it to you? So I think there's, in a way that kind of feels like it precedes it a little bit, there's kind of an embrace of just childish acceptance or innocence of like, well, the monster's real. I see it, and so it must be real. I don't have to explain it away, and trying to explain it away might actually put me in more danger, you know?
Yeah. You know what character I think represents a lot of this? Would be Dr. Van Helsing, like the alchemist, where he is a man of science, but he is superstitious. And I think that's what this novel boils down to, is like you cannot deny the existence of these creatures, but there are practical ways to deal with them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what, like, we even directly compare Matt to Van Helsing. I think he and Callahan kind of feel like the Van Helsing, conduits in a lot of ways, but they are very practical. They're like, here's what the books tell us to do, so let's try it, you know? Let's fill up our, like, I kind of want them to have like a super soaker full of holy water because that would be fun. But let's just use this holy water because it's right here, you know, or let's go get like, they have a list of all of the things, and what works they take and what doesn't they leave, you know? Okay, so let's talk about, this is a 1980 interview with Oui magazine. He opened up about how the political environment of the era inspired the book. Dan, would you mind reading this section?
Sure. Stephen says, I wrote Salem's Lot during the period when the Irving Committee was sitting. That was also the period when we first learned of the Ellsberg break-in, the White House tapes, the connection between Gordon Libby and the CIA, the news of the enemies list, and other fearful intelligence. During the spring, summer, fall of 73, it seems that the federal government had been involved in so much subterfuge and so many covert operations that, like the bodies of the faceless wetbacks that Juan Corona was convicted of slaughtering in California, the horror would never end. Every novel is to some extent an inadvertent psychological portrait of the novelist, and I think that the unspeakable obscenity in Salem's Lot has to do with my own disillusionment and consequent fear of the future. In a way, it is more closely related to Invasion of the Body Snatchers than it is to Dracula. The fear behind Salem's Lot seems to be the government has invaded everybody.
So this was really interesting to me. And the last title, I think I was expecting it to be compared to, although I see it, you know, I don't know if I necessarily see a government connection. I will say reading about all of those controversies gives me a little bit of hope right now, because like, I don't totally know what most of that is. I could make an educated guess if I really try, but like, it doesn't like immediately bring to mind a whole bunch of horrific things that, you know, so, you know, years down the road, maybe the things that we feel like are immediate and we can't get away from will feel like kind of quaint relics that we have to remember what they're about, you know. But back to Salem's Lot, do we see this connection to Invasion of the Body Snatchers? And does this ever feel like a political novel?
For me, 1,000%. And it was actually, it's been fascinating, especially reading it twice this year, to compare it to what's going on in a little ways. And in some ways, it's a good reminder that, like, okay, sadly, cause a wheel sometimes, and a reminder that some of these are recurring issues in various scope and scale. Doesn't make it any easier. But anyways, but that there is this, like, there is this feeling to me, the political nature of it in various ways, whether or not it's the institutions failing us, whether it's like the institutions, whether it's a religious institution or a governmental institution, and just whether or not these institutions are able to protect people. Because here it's like the law enforcement, they're doing their thing, but they're not really a presence as far as actually preventing anything here, right? It's a lot of these people banding together on their own to do something about what they are seeing in their town. And the cops and all the agencies like that are playing catch up more often than not. And even with the science, it's a little behind the curve about figuring out like what is actually going on and exploring those possibilities. And even with religion, I mean, it's only going to go so far. And we see, obviously, there's a lot of questioning there. So I think that there's a lot of threads of that. And then also, I mean, just looking at this small town, and you can't, this idea about just this contagion coming in, right? And whether, you know, what that contagion is could be construed or interpreted a lot of different ways. Because like, yeah, maybe it is this literal monster coming to town, right? Or maybe it's, I don't know, global pandemic coming to town and people having various ideas of what it could be. Or it could also be, you know, misinformation permeating a town and all of this sort of stuff, and how that panic and those falsehoods can spread across a community and kind of infect especially a small community, right? So I think that there's a lot of elements that you can read it as just a vampire novel, of course. And I love it for that because it absolutely works on that level. But I do see these elements here. And I don't know, guys, sometimes horror is political. Just saying. Hot take, right?
I may have heard that somewhere. Yeah. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I had not really thought of it as being political, but now I think that is like a good argument. Because I would think of this as political in the way that like City Hall or a homeowners association is political. But if you're taking it broadly, you could almost say like people like Ben, a writer, aka like a journalist, is sort of uncovering this grand conspiracy. And the deeper he digs, the more he realizes many people who are prominent in the society are involved in the cover-up. So I could definitely see it, especially with the paranoia of the Nixon era. Like obviously Vietnam and Nixon had a big impact on King's writing. So I think at that point, it was very hard to divorce it from the politics of the day. I think the politics of the present is so overtly cartoonish and ghastly that it almost is like hacky to make a comparison. Whereas I think with this, like people that were really locked in and paying attention to what was happening were like, wait, this our government, we can't trust it. Yeah. And this is coming off not, a generation after the World War II where it was like, we did it. We all worked together. And I was reading somewhere too, it was like 1971. That's like basically like the start of the collapse of the modern American society. Because it's like we finally lost faith in the government and the genie is out of the bottle and it's never really gone back in since. And I think that's kind of reflected in all of King's work, even following this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I didn't, necessarily go to politics until we started putting this together, because I think I do just really get swept up in this vampire novel, and the writing about the town is part of what I love, but like small town politics is still political too. So I think for me that it's more of the grassroots angle of it, which is something that I see down here in the South in a pretty small, pretty tight-knit community. And it's something that as like we see this system, this municipality just completely fall apart and fail itself, and how quickly that happens when a couple of key figures kind of start to crumble, And also one of the things that struck me on this read is towards the end where they start kind of tricking each other or spreading out, like you go to your neighbor's house and that's how the disease spreads. And just kind of this revelation that somebody that you have lived next to for maybe 10 years, you've watched football with them, you've had barbecue, your kids play together, you talk about mowing your lawn, and they could have such a completely different idea or belief set from you. You've just never talked about it before. It's not exactly like a vampire, but it is that kind of feeling of betrayal of like, I didn't think you had a monstrous quality to you, and now you are bringing it to my doorstep, and what am I going to do, move,
Yeah, there's the opening of, and I'll talk about it more later, but I think it's chapters called Lot 3. And it opens by describing the secrets that the neighbors keep. And they're just like, we all knew she has falsies, and this guy wears female underwear, and like we all have skeletons in the closet. And the thing, I had to look it up earlier, but it was the 8-line party line. And I know party lines from like sex commercials of like, hey, call the hottest local singles. But I looked it up, and they're like, yeah, it's basically just like a phone line that's always on, and anyone who picks it up can talk. So the old lady breathing in, she's just spying on the neighbors and being like, ooh, let's get all the gossip because she has nothing else better to do.
Yeah. You know how I know what a party line is? It's from listening to the audio version of Grandma by one Stephen King, where he wants to call the doctor, and I can hear now them saying, who's listening in on this line? I'd like to know. But just this concept of a party line of not having privacy there, it feels dangerous. But also I could understand why that would feel like security too. Like in this story, in Grandma, he picks up the phone line and he knows there's somebody there. Like even if he doesn't know exactly who it is, it's like instant connection, especially in a world where we didn't have cell phones. We weren't able to instantly connect with everyone, It is
a double-edged sword too, which I think is cool that he points out, because the fact that there's a lot of times where our main characters are finding out information from the gossips of the town. They're not finding out from the cops. They're not finding out from the newspapers. They're not finding out even from the medical professionals. They're finding out because what's her face
Mabel
told
Wirtz.
somebody, Mabel Wirtz told somebody at the diner, and they told like, oh, did you know? Oh, you didn't hear? Because they're not releasing that information to the public yet for whatever reason. Yeah, they don't have all the facts or whatever. Fair.
Yeah.
But the gossips are help fueling this information and putting it out there. Some of it can be bad. Maybe not all of it is right, because some of the gossip could be not helpful. But then again, if you can't trust your people in authority to give you that information, unfortunately, sometimes you have to get it elsewhere, which I'm not saying is a good or a bad thing here, but it's just, I find it interesting that he's able to show both sides of that here. And I think that plays into his sort of, I don't know, political inspirations.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think my favorite iteration of that is when Susan Norton's mom has heard about Ben's first wife, and she was like, well, he took a breathalyzer, so that means he was drunk. And she has just formed all of these opinions. And it's because she doesn't have any actual information. So that's what she's able to get. And so we can see how misinformation starts to spiral. And it does make me think, like, when your authority cannot be trusted, or when they are gone, maybe they're vampires too. Or like Parkins Gillespie, when they're like, well, fuck it, I'm out. You know, one of the things we have been talking about a lot on Murder Made Fiction, because we're talking about Ed Gein, but just kind of this idea of criminalizing communities that cannot depend on law enforcement. Like when you create a community that cannot depend on law enforcement, like I just said, you're creating that secrecy, and there's a danger there, because there's like fallible stability there, and there's so many, it is kind of like a grassroots society. And so I think this novel really does show how somebody like Barlow and Straker are really able to thrive there, because who can you trust? What can you rely on? It's really just kind of each other. And while that can be very reliable, like Mabel Wirtz, she's watching everything all day. That's like all she's doing. So there is a security there, knowing that somebody is watching, somebody knows what's going on. But then what happens? Like, she's manipulated too. She falls just as easily, you know?
Yeah. I think it's important you mentioned that scene though with Susan's mother. It's very hard to read that section because she's like, you know, narcissistic, abusive mom. Yeah. But she is pointing out like Ben has skeletons in his closet as well. And I think that's like the recurring motif of this, that everyone has these secrets. Even our, you know, Shining Knight here, he has a background that might be checkered, and it's not vampirism, but there's still something there that he's not fully revealing. And I don't know, I think it goes to the theme of the novel.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And it's your secrets. It's your secrets that prove to be dangerous, or that make you vulnerable. Because I think what I was kind of fumbling towards is when you feel like you cannot go to someone in authority, you try to create that safety for yourself, and it's not as reliable, you know, or somebody is able to prey on your secrets. So let's talk about publishing Salem's Lot. So King gave his editor, Bill Thompson, 2 drafts to consider for his follow-up to Carrie. One was Second Coming. The other was a not-so-scary work of literary fiction called Roadwork. And this is a fun fact, which, okay, so weird. When we were talking to Joe Hill, Randall asked him what's an underrated Stephen King novel, and Roadwork is what he mentioned. Dude. What? I know. So I was like, maybe I should go back and revisit. And I know Julia is a huge defender of Bachman and Roadwork. So, you know, maybe time for a revisit. It does kind of feel like a November story too. So, you know. And then a little fun story about this. If you read the afterword to different seasons, King tells this story but subs in Blaze instead of Roadwork. It's just Blaze being Blaze.
Just Blaze being Blaze.
This is because the afterword was written in 1982 and Roadwork was published as Bachman in 1981. At that point, nobody knew that Bachman was king, so he had to keep up the ruse. Blaze wasn't published until 2007. Thompson warned him, this is one of my favorite anecdotes, that if they went with Salem's Lot, he ran the risk of being pegged as a horror writer. As King wrote in his afterword to different seasons, he decided he'd be fine with people thinking he was a horror writer. Bill, no one can make a living writing just horror stories in America, he recalls himself saying in the different seasons afterward. Lovecraft starved in Providence. Block gave it up for suspense novels and unknown-type spoofs. The Exorcist was a one-shot. You'll see. Salem's Lot was published in October 1975 and sold roughly 26,000 copies in hardcover. The paperback edition earned him $500,000 advance, which he split with Doubleday and became his first bestseller. So we've all probably heard that anecdote before, right? Like if we go like following up with Carrie with this, you're going to be pegged as horror. Do we still consider King a horror writer?
I think he's purposely tried to break out of it. But man, what terrible advice from this guy.
Right,
It's like
I know.
It's like in 2006, it's like, don't buy Bitcoin. It'll never be worth anything. And now I'm like, God damn it. I wish I would have done that.
Well, of course, to be fair though, the odds that your writer is going to be Stephen King too, you know,
Right.
like
I mean,
he's
this is
probably
the
right
safe-
on most horror writers.
It's the safe route, but that's also not, great art doesn't come from, swimming in the shallow end, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think he's consciously emerged from, he's taken on all different kinds of projects to not be horror, but there's no denying like his first 10 or so novels are all in the horror genre.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still consider him a horror writer, but he's also more than that. He's a master of horror writing, as well as wonderfully proficient at various other genres as well. I'm just full of hot takes tonight. In his own words, isn't it? Life of Chuck, people can contain multitudes.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like he can contain multitudes.
Yeah.
One of them being horror writer and so many other things, and that's fine.
Yeah, and he's certainly leaned into it in some of those commercials too, in like Creep Show, where he embraces it, I think, kind of tongue in cheek. And I know like later as he wanted to be taken more seriously, I think that's when, especially when it was like the Signet and like he was jumping publishers. But I mean, hey, if you got a gimmick like and it's working, I don't think there's nothing wrong with that.
I will say I do think that reputation though does permeate. I'm thinking of even my mom, who was a librarian for 25 years, won't read Stephen King because she thinks it's too scary.
Yeah.
Even though he has like done all of this other stuff and she is aware of that. But I think for people who are not into the genre, there's still a very wide perception that is what he does.
Yeah.
And even though they've probably seen Shawshank and Green Mile and Stand By Me and like all these other properties that aren't necessarily scary, maybe in a different way, but somehow that connection is still kind of lost in translation sometimes, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think every couple of years around October, I give a presentation, like a fun kind of thing, to my office people. And most of them are not horror fans. So I am the anomaly. I'm the one where they're like, have you seen Suburbia? It was too scary for me. And that's when I realized how far down the rabbit hole I am.
Suburbia?
Suburbia. Yeah. I had somebody tell me that was the last horror movie I saw because it was too scary. The Shia LaBeouf Suburbia,
It's that Rear Window remake, basically.
It is, yeah. I think it's been a while since I've seen it.
It's been a while. Sorry.
It's been a while. Yeah, we also play a lot of songs like that there. Anyways, so I gave one about Stephen King talking about I'm writing, and I had to preface the whole thing by saying, this is not scary. I am not trying to scare you. I'm talking about writing. And I'm about to give one about Halloween movies. And I think I'm going to surprise them because I'm not going to have much Stephen King on it because he doesn't really write much Halloween stuff, And I agree with you.
Riding the bullet, maybe a little bit.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about Riding the Bullet. We do have an episode, I believe it's on Patreon, that like King's best stories for Halloween too. It's just been a while since I've really thought through it, but I think Riding the Bullet was definitely on it.
I don't know if I'd recommend that to people.
Not the movie. The story, yes. I like the story a lot, but maybe not the movie. But I think he definitely has kind of transcended genre to me. Like he just feels like he writes stories about characters. He's much more interested in humanity. But what's funny, and I mean specifically even talking about Blaze, which feels like his attempt to kind of try to do an Of Mice and Men story, the horror always creeps in. Like he almost just can't help himself, because that I think is his first like touchstone. Even if he's writing something like crime, there is always going to be that horror element. I mean, look at the Hodges trilogy. What the third novel is essentially a supernatural novel. So
go ahead.
I was gonna say he's comfortable in the dark.
Yes.
Whether or not it's horror or just darkness, like those dark elements. Like he's not afraid to go and explore dark territory that maybe others aren't as comfortable exploring and then actually putting on paper, right? So I feel like he's just, no matter what kind of story, there's going to be some darkness there.
Well, and I think finding the horror in like innocuous stories too, like he is able to really dive deep and pull horror out of something.
Yeah, not to go on a detour, but I would even argue the Dark Tower, which a lot of people write off as being a Western, I would argue it's like a meta fantasy with horror elements. It's not what you think you're going to get, but there are scenes in it that are very horrific. But I would not consider the series across 7 or 8 books to be a horror the way that like The Stand is a horror.
See, and I was going to bring up The Stand too, because I think in one of our Twinners, we talked about how do we consider this horror or sci-fi? Which one of those is first? And I think it might depend on which book you're looking at. Are you looking at the first, second, or third book? But I think that's always so fascinating to me is how do we classify these stories? Because the easy answer is horror because maybe somebody dies or it's vampires, you know, but there's always so much more.
But even like it. Dracula, is Dracula a horror or is it a gothic romance? Like we contain multitudes, as I think someone just said.
We do. Yeah. Direct quote from
Does Chuck
Stephen
say that in the
King.
movie a few times maybe?
I think he Yes, I think he does. It's been a while since I've seen that because it's not scary. Now there are horrific elements in Life of Chuck, but I don't think I would consider that a horror story, you know, unless, you know, dying and the end of the universe is horror, which it is. So let's talk about Salem's Lot, Maine, and small towns. All right. Over the years, King has spoken quite a bit about Salem's Lot as a work that speaks to his love-hate relationship with a small town Maine milieu in which he grew up with. And we have this clip from a 1979 interview with Yankee Magazine. Rachel, would you mind reading this?
He says, there will always be a special cold place in my heart for Salem's Lot. Oh, God, love that. It seemed to capture some of the special things about living in a small town that I'd known all my life. It's funny, but after reading the book, people will say to me, you must really hate Maine. And I really like it here. The novel shows a lot of scars about the town, but so much of it is a love song to growing up in a small town. So many things are dying in front of us. The small stores where men hang out, the soda fountains, the party lines. Maybe it's just that when I wrote the book, we were so poor and our trailer was little and cold, and I could go back to my little furnace room where I wrote with a 4th grade desk propped on my knees. And when I got excited, it jiggled up and down as I hunched forward. Maybe that's why I like it so much. I could go down there and fight vampires whenever I wanted.
And then in a 1980 interview with Rolling Stone, he says, it's a story of country people, not necessarily good country people. Ever since I was a kid, I always said to myself, sometimes I'll write about the place where I live. The people form the town and the town forms its own character. I took Our Town as an exercise book on how to do it. And then, Rachel, would you read one more section from a 1985 interview with Cinefantastique?
Sure. No, that's where the quote starts. That wasn't just me, but also sure. Sure. Oh, yeah, because I've lived there all my life, and you have to be. If you're going to live in a place all your life, and if you want to write seriously, you almost have to write about that place. I mean, there are guys that have lived in one place all their lives and who write about other places. There's a guy who's never left England who writes Westerns. He's very successful. He researches them, and he does pretty well that way. But if you're going to write about something seriously and you've always lived in one place, you have to write a certain amount of stuff about there. But if I wrote about Maine, New England all the time, I'd go crazy too. So I get away from there every once in a while. But the novels and other stuff that I've done are pretty exclusively set in that area. There's nothing wrong with that because you can find universal factors anywhere.
And it's funny to read those quotes because I read this novel and I just feel so much love for the small town, you know, flaws and all. It's almost like, you know, that's part of why we love it is because it is flawed, because it's real. So I wanted to ask, and this almost feels like the beginning of like one of those bracket episodes, but is this King's best small town?
It's up there.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's a few good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely put Needful Things in there.
Yeah.
Pet Cemetery is small town. I mean, almost all the ones that take place in Maine. You could argue Derry is not that big of a town either, but I do like the way he's talking about he writes where he lives. And since like the latter years of King's work are often set in Florida when he lives in like the Sarasota region. So like Duma-Key is a small town, but it's like more of a, like these are the main parts of the Yankee towns, whereas the Florida ones are like the Salt Life, kind of like lazier southern towns.
There's so many. Even Joyland, I love the town in Joyland. I mean, it's funny though. Not all of these feel like towns. Some of them feel bigger in scope, and I think this is one of the bigger, better small towns. I mean, there's a ton of characters here. So while I love Joyland, it's like we're getting little snippets of the town, but not the full encompassing place.
Yeah.
And like I also like 11/22/63. I feel like that's a pretty like there's
Jody.
lots of different elements of the town that we're getting to explore. So I feel like this is one of the better fleshed out where I have a real idea of like I can picture this town in my head, and we know so many people in this town. And so the weight of all these different hits and when people are missing and who's doing what and all of this kind of stuff, when all those pieces come together, it just hits that much harder. So I think this is one of the best small towns. But yeah, there's some good ones.
Yeah.
On the 11/22, just I think that's almost King being nostalgic for when he lived in the small town and that when he used to write about it. Because I think Salem's Lot is like, well, Carrie's not takes place. Was it Chamberlain, Maine?
Yeah,
Carrie?
Chamberlain.
But I don't get this. It doesn't seem like as old timey. Whereas this, like, I feel like this kind of sets the template that King follows for a number of decades. Of like, he's just so good at the slice of life of a New England small little community, and I think it's hard to escape that, like in any of his writing. And like I was saying, other novels he tries to go back and do it, but he's too popular and successful to fully be, you know, like he said, he was living in a trailer writing by a furnace. It's just, you can't recapture that unless you literally went in a time machine and lived that all over again.
And repeating yourself. Like, I'm sorry, if you're writing about this, if you're pulling from the same memories and the same town all like time and time again, and you've written something like Salem's Lot that is so good, and you've written about this town so incredible, and you've written about so many other great towns, I just can't imagine, like, how do you reinvent that in a way that feels worthwhile and feels fresh when it's like, fuck, I've written about basically the same incarnation of this town like 15, 20 times. Like, that's got to be so difficult at a certain point that you have to set it back. Jody, you have to set it back in like a nostalgic time. Like, you have to move it around in some way because like write what you know, but at the same time, okay, what if you already have, you know?
Right.
Like, that's just like a hard thing to navigate, I think, to make it actually feel, I don't know, just new in some way.
Well, and how are you going to top this too?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Like this, I love Castle Rock. I love Needful Things. I love Derry. This is the one that I recommend to people as the best example of King writing about a small town for a couple of reasons. And I think one is because this, other than the two short stories that kind of bookend this is really the only time we are really living in Salem's Lot and we really get to live with the town. And while I think it's really fun to return to Castle Rock and Derry, there is kind of a digestible quality here where like this is the snapshot of the town. This is all we really get, and then it dies. And also, I think about this moment in The Shining where they talk about the Overlook as an organism digesting them, and I think this is either the best or like this is a little bit different than Castle Rock and Derry because I think there's so much writing here about the town as an organism itself, you know, and it just does feel a little bit different. It feels like we are interrogating, going back to what we were talking about with the politics of it, it feels like we're interrogating the way the town functions as an organism here in a way that we don't with Derry and Castle Rock. And also those towns continue here, whereas Salem's Lot doesn't. So we really see the pinnacle of it and then the immediate downfall too. Well, I've talked about a town crumbling. It wouldn't if it had good structure and format. So let's go into our next category, structure and format.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher. Look.
Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward novel, at least compared to Carrie, but we do get these delightful interludes that we were just talking about. The chapters called The Lot. And I kind of chuckle and love the fact that we get the Roman numerals of like Ben. It's Ben's 4th chapter. It's Ben's like 2nd chapter, you know. But each of these are called The Lot, including one where we start at 4 a.m. and spiral through the town with little vignettes until I believe midnight. And I think where it ends is the little Glick, Ralphie, I believe, getting it becomes unspeakable is the last part of that chapter. Does this ever feel indulgent to us?
I don't think so. The lots are probably my favorite chapters in this book.
Yeah.
And I've always loved the way Stephen King has odd like structure just in terms of like chapters and sections. You know, you read his book and you'll be like, oh, I'm up to 34, and then next page will be like chapter 2.
Yeah.
I always think that's like very funny. And like, yeah, in the Dark Tower, he has like the shuffling of the cards, like the tarot deck. I think there's like a creativity there that it adds to the eeriness. So I don't think it's indulgent at all. I honestly think it's him coming into his style.
Yeah.
Because as we said, like this second novel, he's writing based on what he knows. He mentions the influence of Our Town. There's a lot of Dickens that I see in here. Mm-hmm. But I think this is him starting to emerge as an artist and create that unique voice that distinguishes him from, you know, the masters that came before him.
Yeah.
I can see how it would feel indulgent maybe on a first, like while you're reading it for the first time, because reading this being like, okay, where is this going? Why am I talking about this person? Oh, why am I talking about this person again? But what I will say is the second he starts to bring and put all the pieces together, that's where it's worthwhile to me. Like it sticks that landing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden, all of these seeds he's planted, all of these, you know, red threads that he's got all over this board, now they're all starting to converge and now it's all coming together, which I think strengthens the story overall. So at the time, I can see how maybe it would feel a little like, okay, are we just filling pages? Like, why do I need to know about this? Like, what is this adding? But then it does add something. You just have to kind of wait for it. And so I love it now, but I can see it being a little frustrating maybe at the very beginning. Not even frustrating, but just kind of like, all right, you know, what are we doing here? Where are we going? But I love it when all of those pieces, when the characters start interacting with each other, like, the second they're like, oh, you should call Father Callahan. It's like, yes, it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Right. Like the wheels are turning. And I think an experiment that I would be interested in is just reading the Lot chapters, you know, and skipping everything else and seeing what that feels like. And I'm thinking back to what I said about the first time I tried to read this. I wonder if indulgent is not, I don't think that's the word I would use. That maybe was my galvanizing question to just spark conversation. But I think, I wonder if I just had a hard time locking into what the story was as like probably a 14-year-old, you know, like I wanted, all right, let's get to the vampires already, you know, but now like it's just, I think it's the best writing in the book and the way it slowly descends too, because it feels like each one gets darker and darker, even though we start out, especially when we're talking about the mom and the little baby Randy. Like it is dark from the very beginning, especially a couple of chapters that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's like you see the disintegration happening too. And I think it's the patience of this that tells us it's not just a couple of characters in this town dying, it's the town itself. And I have a final chapter, or not a final chapter, a final section on my word processor list. I also think that this book walked so that Needful Things could run, because I think the pacing of it, like you were saying, Rachel, when the pieces start to come together, it's like it really starts to sing, which leads me to,
I was going to say just really quick, having just done the Summer of the Stand, right, where I feel like the Stand, the characters are so important, even the minor characters have some kind of significance, whereas with this a lot of the characters don't. And that's even on this reread, I was kind of like, oh man, there's so many characters I'm trying to juggle. And I think once you resign yourself to be like, I don't have to memorize every character, I could just kind of take it in a wave. Like, yeah, so this woman's child dies, may not be significant going forward into the novel other than to set the tone. Right. So even like, you know, there's like 150 in the Stand or something, and we were doing such a good job nerding out and tracking them all. But it took me a second to kind of understand how to read this book.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it is early in his writing style, like it does feel like it's written I don't want to say just like different because that's such a vague term, but it's, I think you approach this differently. And I think there's, like you said, like this walk so needful things can fly. And I feel like that's a good segue to the big ass bird comment.
Yes.
Sorry not to jump ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. I do want to talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I'm glad you brought that up because when we start at 4 a.m, there are these two characters that are like milking cows or whatever. I have no idea what those kids' names are. Yeah. Like they don't really matter to the story. And so maybe indulgent is not necessarily a bad word because I do like that he allows himself to spread out with this and to talk about these characters, to make them part of the story, even if we can kind of dismiss them because they're really just kind of tone setting. But yeah, one of my favorite quotes from his new introduction, which is in the audiobook. I'm not exactly sure when that came into these publications, but King mentions the moment the story, quote, takes off like a big ass bird. What moment is that for us? What is it? What's the moment where it's like, okay, I'm fully in?
I mean, I'm fully in. I mean, I'm always fully in, but that's because I know what happens. But when the Glick boys have their moment, I think that's like the first little hook. And then with Mike Ryerson, how do you say his name? Ryerson. I think that is really when it's like, okay, like shit's starting to go down for real. And that's for me. I don't know if that's what I don't know if it's takes off like a big ass bird. I think maybe that happens a little bit later, but that's the moment where it's like, okay, I'm not putting this down. Yeah. I'm in.
I think the way I take that too is like, I struggle to find the moment. You think of like a heavy bird, like struggle, not just like soaring like right away, but really you're like, I was thinking like albatross or like
in Rescuers Down Under,
I was going to say like Rescue.
Yeah. But when he literally like, when you're like, has he left the water yet? Has it? So there really isn't a moment that I could pinpoint in this book where I'm like, oh, I'm hooked in, but it's that subtlety of like, you get almost like hypnotized by it the way you would with like Stryker. Yeah.
We're glamored.
You get glamored by it. Yeah.
I think for me, it is the moment with Marjorie Glick. And I think I'm already invested in the story because it's fucking scary. Like, I think the Mike Ryerson chapters and the Danny Glick chapters are some of my favorites where it starts to really get scary. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. But for me, the Marjorie Glick part, that signals the end of the people don't believe us. We stop having to justify. Exactly. We've got proof. Now we're doing the thing. And it's like the moment where I always think about that 4th season of Arrested Development, where it's like at the very, very end, it's like the cast finally comes together. And I talked about that with the meeting notes in the stand too. That is when things start to move, that like the wheels are in place and the car is moving now. We're not building anymore. So I think that's it for me. But I would be curious to hear what King says that moment is.
That's a long ways into the book.
It really is. Yeah.
Like that's more than halfway through the book, isn't it? That the Marjorie stuff
I think
happens?
So. I think it's probably 2/3 in. Yeah. Because
so that's like, I agree with you because that's the moment where it's like, okay, there's no more questioning what this is. Like this is happening. This person has been bit. Yeah. Jimmy's been bit. Like everybody is all in. On the fact that like, okay, yep, we're not crazy. These are vampires. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about the vampire element of it. I'm trying to work in a Blues Traveler reference because whenever I see the words "the hook" on our outline, because that's the next section, listeners, I always think of "Hook," the Blues Traveler song, because it's good. So I can't think of any
from Kingpin, from the Kingpin soundtrack.
Yes.
Isn't Hook in that?
I mean, I don't know. I just know it because I used to be able to sing all the words, the fast part. So anyways, the hook brings you back and we are going forward to the hook in our next category.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
I don't have a whole lot to say here because to me, the hook is vampires. Is that how y'all see the hook? Or, maybe going back to what we were just talking about, is the hook the destruction of a small town?
Yeah, I think if I had to say what this book is about, I mean, it's not a ton different than Dracula, where it's like, okay, a vampire shows up into a town and kind of wreaks havoc. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I think what we talked about the first hour is more I don't know, like it's a lot more subtle. Like even when he says like a big ass bird, like it's not something that just immediately soars. But yeah, I would say like vampire comes to town and shit goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the vampire is the biggest hook, but I do love this small town. Like this town is a character, and oh God, just this sounds so stupid saying this, but like his writing is also the hook.
Yeah.
Because the way he's describing this town, the love that he's pouring into developing, like you said, this living, breathing organism and all these people, that's what has me coming back to this time and time again. Because I do love getting lost in this world, getting lost in these people. I feel like I know my way around this town because it's not just one. Yeah, there's the Marston house and the boarding house, but they do go so many other places. And I love that because you really get a feel for this setup. So for me, that's like a secondary hook because vampires are great. But we've seen vampires a million different ways. And like what separates the ones that we keep coming back to versus some of the other slop, right? And like maybe it's because it has a Skarsgård in it. Maybe it's or not. Maybe it's because they're glittery vampires. I don't know. But there's got to be something else there because vampires have been done a bazillion times.
Yeah.
And for me, the second hook is going to be that small town character and that small town feel.
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I need to correct. It's "But Anyway" is the Blues Traveler song from Kingpin. I don't want the music heads to get mad at me, and I don't need to get
dare you,
your hate online. But yeah, sorry, that was very
Travel
important.
Do you even know Blues Traveler?
Do I even know John Popper?
Do you even play harmonica, Dan?
I tried to I used to like when he would go in Howard Stern and he would pull out like multiple knives. He just seems like such a strange character, the singer of Blues Traveler, that is.
Well, and I also think harmonica, because everybody thinks they can play harmonica, you just blow into it, but it's really hard,
I have chapped lips all the time, and whenever I use those, it's like putting a cheese grater on my mouth, so no thanks.
Gross.
Yuck.
Anyways,
I think, Rachel, that's a good point. Like, to me, this almost feels like a hook into Stephen King,
Yeah.
And I do have some friends, one in particular, who likes horror a lot, but doesn't really like Stephen King, not really able to kind of vibe with the writing. And I remember telling him, try Salem's Lot. If you don't like Salem's Lot, King may just not be for you, which is fine. But I think, because, everybody's got their taste, but I think this is such a quintessential example of what constant readers really love about King, what he does really, really well. I don't think this is a personal preference. I don't think this is his best book, and I don't think it's my favorite, but I think it is the best encapsulation of what makes Stephen King the Stephen King that we think of when we say Stephen King, So, but yeah, the town itself does become a hero and a villain. Some might say a better character than some of the actual human characters. I would never talk shit about anybody in this book, though. Let's find out if I do this time in our next category, heroes and villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
So, I've given Ben Mears a lot of shit over the years. I think he's boring. I think he strikes me as such an early protagonist, like just kind of milquetoast. I also think that the guy in the Tobe Hooper Salem's Lot, it's like he wants to be young John Voight, but he's not. And he always just feels so boring to me. And as I was reading this time, I was really trying to give Ben the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he's boring. I don't think he's as boring as I thought he was. But what do y'all think? Is Ben an intriguing character?
No.
Okay, thank you.
He's intriguing? No.
Yeah.
I feel like what we see is kind of what we get with Ben Mears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot of mystery and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't want it to sound like this is a bad thing. But as far as maybe interesting, a little bit more complex characters, there's elements that are there. I just don't necessarily feel like we necessarily get maybe as much as we would in some of his later works. Like even the stuff with his wife, like it's kind of touched on here and there, and it's an element of his story, but it's kind of always like, it almost feels like he doesn't want to think about that. And like, fair. I get it. Like, I understand.
Yeah.
But this is a book about this character.
Yeah.
Seems kind of important. I don't know.
And so Stephen, this is like, as you said, pretty much the first full novel he had wrote. He doesn't have enough experience being a writer yet to write a writer's point of view interesting.
That's a good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He lived in small town Maine his whole life. Therefore, he can write about the small town because he's got, whatever, your 10,000 hours checking off.
Good point.
Yeah.
Not too
and
shabby.
he taught in a high school, and he was in high school, so he can
Right.
write about high school students in Cary. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and he can write about Matt really well, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Ben, I just don't think, because like obviously every other character he writes is a writer, but I think he had to become his own writer to write about a writer. It sounds really silly, but he had to at least experience it to the point where he was like, I mean, even this, he was advised, don't do another horror novel. By the time, he's a dozen books in, he's like, I run the game, right? This is mine. Like, I'm the literary giant, so I can write about whatever I want. And I think he was allowed to be more indulgent. Whereas I think Ben would have been more interesting had we seen some of these indulgences. Instead, it's just like, he's this kind of writer guy, has this vague project. Oh, he's got a little darkness in the past.
That he doesn't like to talk about. He doesn't like to talk about his work either, which I think is interesting because I do find that very telling and like understandable. And I think it does fit in with the town and the character. And there's some logic behind it, but also it's boring on paper though. Like, oh, what are you writing about? You're writing. He's like, I don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Not yet. It's like, okay.
One of the things we talk about a lot is Stephen King's writers and how, this Bill Denbrough is a proxy for him. Maybe Jack Torrance is he just writes about so many tortured writers. And I never think about Ben Mears as one of them. And I wonder, because you're right, Dan, this is the first one really that we spend a lot of time with. And I wonder if there was a bit of a learning curve, but also a fear of really allowing this character to be someone he channels himself into in a way that we'll see with him in later writing. And going back to the big ass bird, because he says that in the context of Ben Mears, he is talking in that introduction about letting Ben be the hero Ben wants to be. I just never feel like he is super heroic, like the heroism, I don't know. It doesn't ever grab me, but I wonder if the turning point or the big ass bird moment for King is allowing Ben to just become a little more human, and that also is when he stops caring about the writing too. Like he kind of forgets about the book once everybody is a fucking vampire,
But I also think this book, and it speaks to Ben's character, but there's a lack of hustle that we're more used to in the more contemporary King books, or even just like literature in general. Whereas I do feel like this does mirror kind of an older fashioned story structure, but because there is like a lot of like, we'll get into it later, but they'll like kill a couple of vampires and be like, all right, we're going to go take the night off and we'll see you tomorrow. And it's like, there's not this sense of urgency that I think King writes so well about. It's just Ben kind of is like methodically going through the paces at times. And it's hard to remain interested because it doesn't feel like there's no like countdown. It really, it's not like, oh, we have to, and I know they have to like balance night and day, but I don't get that sense of urgency when I read his character.
Yeah. Well, and he's an everyman. And I do think, kind of like ingenues, it takes a while to figure out how to make an ingenue interesting, or it takes a specific kind of talent. And I wonder if just because this is the first one, it's just he's not interesting enough. Now, what I do think he does very well, I think he forms a really good anchor to the story. Like, he's the center of all of this. And I think he holds the cast of characters together really well. It's just that he kind of sinks into the middle of the hurricane, Well, let's talk about Susan. I have some thoughts about this female character. I wish that we had more female characters. She's really the only significant one that we get. Is she a fridge character? And am I saying that right? I think.
I'm not familiar with that term. What does that mean?
It is, okay, and Rachel, we talked about this in the boys pretty recently, I think, on the girls on the boys.
We talked about it on something
recently. Yeah, I think
yeah.
Essentially a fridge character, or an example of fridging, is when a female character exists to essentially die and create misery or trauma for the male character, So does she feel like she is a substantial enough character on her own?
Using that definition, and again, I've never heard that word, but it's I love new words. Yeah,
Let me make sure I got it right.
I totally forgot that she died so early in the novel. Like, it didn't even come to like a climactic thing. She's gone by like even before like 2/3 of the way in, and her personality is college graduate, which I suppose back at this time, like that was more of a thing.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, you know her? Oh, yeah, she's a college graduate. Like, I guess that was unique at the time, you know, for a woman to graduate from college. But it's like just kind of lives with her mom, doesn't.
She's also an
she has
artist,
ambitions.
Dan.
Yeah, so, my bad.
Yeah. She still works
She's
with
art
movie
on the
theater.
fridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I did want to look it up, and I remember, Rachel, last time we talked about this, I looked it up too. So this is from Wikipedia. Women in refrigerators is a term coined by Gail Simone in 1999 to describe a literary trope which involves female characters facing disproportionate harm, such as death, maiming, or assault, to serve as plot devices to motivate male characters, an event colloquially known as fridging. So there are some examples there, but
I can see that. But I do think that we do get some of this character. Like,
yeah.
There's other characters that we've seen in his works that we get far less from. And I do think that I don't feel like she's used in this way.
Yeah.
Because she's not the first. She's not the only character that suffers this same fate. Yes, it does impact Ben, you know, proportionately, considering their relationship, like more than some of the other people. But she's not the only person to go missing, to suffer this fate at the hands of the vampire. And it does happen a little ways in. And we do get some of her own insights, her own struggles, her relationship with Floyd, and just feeling kind of like lost and aimless in this town and kind of figuring out what she wants her future to be. And I feel like that, I don't know, like that restless energy that she has is communicated pretty well and also really fitting for this small town and her relationship with her mom and just, I don't know. So I think that there's enough elements that we get prior to this happening that she doesn't necessarily feel like a fridge to me, but her death is used to move the story forward in that way. So I don't know, half fridge?
Yeah.
Mini fridge?
Mini
Yeah,
fridge.
college dorm fridge.
There's definitely elements of it. But I agree with you. I think it would be, like, she is more of a character, you know, and I love her relationship with her mother. This feels like a precursor to the scenes that we'll get with Franny and her mom in the stand, which are, you know, going back to our episodes, those were some of my favorite moments.
Yeah.
And I do really like this, kind of like a smackdown. I think, to me, the issue I have with Susan, one, it is way too early for them to be saying, I love you.
Agree.
That always bugs me. I'm like, I don't think you love him. She, to me, feels like she is not so much her own character as she is kind of a combination of Mina and Lucy. Like, it feels like that is the function she is serving in this story. Of all of the characters, she does feel most like the plot device to me, because the story feels like it's about the quartet and she was never really going to be a part of that. But you can almost feel King kind of like busting at the seams of those two characters too. Like, she does have more. She does have more to do, even if she doesn't ever quite get to where I want her to be or where he's going to go with other characters who are in very similar positions. Like, she feels like a proto Franny to me.
She does have some, what is it, like gothic pixie dream girl
Gothic
energy.
pixie dream girl. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, okay.
Can I put a button on that just to keep the streak of quoting Simpsons?
Oh, yeah.
When
Please
Bart is
quote The
explaining,
Simpsons, yes.
or Homer's explaining to Bart, like, the birds and the bees, and he's like, son, a woman is a lot like a refrigerator. They're about 6 feet tall, 300 pounds. They make ice. That's the only other time I've heard a woman compared to a fridge.
I love that episode. Is that when Sarah Gilbert, I think, is the guest star? Because
it might be the
babysitter,
has a crush
and then
on her.
And then like doesn't wash. The thing that grosses me out is there's spit in his hand, and he doesn't wash it for like a couple of weeks. But yes, that
she is also an active participant in uncovering, sort of investigating this thing earlier. So I will say, like, thank you for not just making her, like, I don't know, kidnapped by Barlow or something and swept off to the house, or some mysteriously disappearing and like, oh no, she's been captured. So
yeah, she's not a damsel in distress.
Yeah, she's not quite that damsel in distress thing. So I think that also saves her from being, you know, a full-on family fridge and just like a little mini college dorm fridge.
Yeah, and I do think that the fact that she is there their learning moment in how to kill a vampire, that we can trace back to Stoker. You know, I don't necessarily think that's King. But speaking of manic pixie characters, let's talk about a manic pixie dream kid, Mark Petrie. So King spoke specifically about Mark in a 1980 interview with the Tampa Tribune. The interviewer says, "You have very strong child characters." And he says, "Yeah, I like kids." "The kid in Salem's Lot is stronger than the adults." That's the question. And then King responds, "Well, the kid in Salem's Lot is kind of a dream kid." He's a manic pixie dream kid. "He is the boy that any boy would like to be, the kind of boy any boy fantasizes himself to be. He can get out of knots. He's very brave. He's intent on revenging his parents' death, this and that. So for me, he was just sort of a dream figure. He pleased me very much, that boy. I like the way he turned out. He's a bigger-than-life archetypal 11-year-old boy, and a lot of the kid characters in the books are strong and good. But I think kids are strong. They are good, generally speaking, unless they've been warped in some way. I've never met a kid I thought was genuinely mean, although I'm not saying there aren't any. I just haven't met one." And that even made me think of Richie Bodden, the bully kid, because even then we get just a little bit of what his dad is like, you know, and I'm like, well, that's why. It's also funny to me because my son is 11 too, so trying to think of him like outsmarting and killing a vampire familiar, I'm like, how would
he totally would, though. Come on.
I think he could. Yeah, he's been watching Stranger Things. He knows what's up, you know.
Yeah. And I do like I can relate because I would learn how to untie knots, and I would always be like, man, if I get kidnapped, like I am prepared for this, you know, I'm ready to go. So.
Yeah.
And also, you know, watching Lost Boys again with like the Frog Brothers and everything, you're like, if this goes down, like you mentioned super soakers earlier, I was like, oh, that's smart with the holy water.
Oh yeah, we're gonna tear it up. So King also spoke in the same interview about what appeals to him about writing kid characters. The overall thing, too, is the concept of reality. We understand what we understand by comparison and contrast. If we say Mark Petrie goes to sleep 10 minutes after repulsing a vampire, while the teacher, Matt Burke, has a heart attack, then we're saying something about the ability to assimilate reality. It suggests something about the tunnel of perception that we see things in. If kids have wider tunnels of perception, well then, why is that? And what happens to narrow it as we grow up to make the strange and unusual so hard to take? Which, you know, we've kind of talked about this. Does not feel like a prototype novel to me. It feels like it stands on its own, and I don't want to dismiss it. But it does feel like he is starting to explore things that he will fully dive into with it, you know, and even Stand By Me, which could be seen as a proto-it, too. So we did have a bracket about King's best kids. I'm not going to spoil who wins, but I will say Mark made it pretty far. But he didn't win. Is he one of King's best kids? And does he feel real? Like, does he feel like a manic pixie dream boy?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, King's version, right? Like, it's also very telling because it's like this kid's not out there like playing football, although he can beat up a bully.
He can.
So, but yeah, the fact that he's like, he overhears his parents talking about him, and they're just like, "Oh, Mark's such a good boy. We just love him so much." And he's like, "Oh, thank you, Dad." So, like, they have a very sweet, earnest relationship, and gets to make all those models, and can also fucking fight vampires,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I need to check out the kids. Well, I shouldn't say I need to check out kids. That sounds weird. I really need to be checking out more kids brackets. Was that a Patreon episode?
I think it was a Patreon episode. Let me see if I still have it while we're talking, because I am a doc hoarder, so I definitely still have it. Yeah, I think he does feel a little bit manic pixie, but in a really fun way too.
Yes.
You know, and like you said, he is a very specific kind of kid. Like, he's got his interests, and he's not like an asshole about it, you know? And he also is vulnerable. Like, he cries when his parents die. I feel like he feels like an actual kid in ways that Ben, as a protagonist, kind of feels like more of an empty vessel to kind of navigate us through the plot, or, like I said, to hold the cast together. But Mark, to me, always feels like he is real, even if he is a little too good to be true, you know?
And I do think, thinking about this as like political inspiration, I love that he's in there for multiple kind of ways, but just the idea, like the way that Mark sees the world, the way that he's able to, I don't know, look past some of the roadblocks that these adults have, right? Like these obstacles, like, oh, we have to explain this away to get to this point, and how he's able to just make that jump so much easier because he's a kid. Yeah. His imagination is running wild. Like he's just able to get there in a different way. He hasn't been jaded by the world. Like he's not as cynical in that way, but also how he's able to get things done in a different way because he's able to think like that. He's got that youthful energy and that imagination and that resource well of just youth, right? And thinking about just the fact that he was inspired by these political events, just how necessary that is, right? How you need that sort of youthful energy to think of new things in creative ways or just see things from a different perspective. And I don't know, that you're going to need some moral courage to make big changes and how important that is to get things done. So I think that Mark Petrie works in a variety of ways. And I also just, I love that. I love the kind of like the archetype for him, but I also love him as a character. And he's just one of those where it's like, oh, be careful, Mark. Be careful.
So I did find our bracket. He was a member of the Castle Rock Crushers. That was the division going up against the Dairy Delinquents. He did make it to the Final Four, but he had the unfortunate pair up. He had to go up against Charlie McGee. So.
Oh. What about, did Jake make the top 4?
Yes, Jake Chambers did make the top 4.
Otherwise, I was going to call collusion.
Oh, yeah, from the Dairy Delinquents. Julia was on that episode, and she was riding hard for Jake Chambers.
We had a gunslinger on board, don't worry.
We absolutely did, yes. And you know what? Hold that thought, because I want to talk about some gunslingers in just a minute. But let's talk about kind of the other end of the pendulum or the other end of the spectrum, if we're looking at Mark, is Matt Burke. I really love him. He maybe is one of my favorite characters here. Because he just feels so he feels down to earth in a way that Ben wants to be, you know? And I wonder if it's because Ben is an outsider and Matt does feel so lived in here. But to me, Matt is the one that feels like the king proxy. And Dan, you were kind of hinting at that earlier. How do you feel about Matt?
Yeah, because it's like the whole English teacher aspect of him. And I think, like I said, like that's something that King knew more about, was teaching than writing at this point. So I think that he's just more of a, I don't even think he's like full on proxy, but I just think he's closer to Matt than he is to Ben.
Yeah, I think so too. Rachel, what do you think about Matt?
I really like this character. I like how he relates to Ben. I like how he gets involved. And I mean, poor guy, he goes through it, right?
Yeah, he does.
And he has some really scary scenes too. And I like how he kind of works through those and just how, I don't know, ingrained he is in this community. And I think it's really cool. And I think he's a king proxy in that he runs into Susan and Matt and all the, or not Matt, Mike
Ryerson, yeah.
Yeah, and is able to, he, knows them from when they were teens or whatever, when he was teaching them. And so that's kind of why he looks at Mike and is concerned, because he's like, oh shit, like, is he like on drugs? Like, I remember him as this kind of kid, and is able to connect with him and be like, hey, what's going on here? And just has that really deep connection to the community, which I think is important because Ben doesn't have that, obviously. And so he's able to assist Ben and bring that sort of context in a different way to things that are going. And obviously he knows everybody. So he's able to be like, call my friend Jimmy and get him over here and pull these strings. So that's a big necessary component to making this book work. Because if it was just Ben and Susan, like, this would take forever. They'd be dead. Absolutely. Well, she is dead.
Yeah. Well, true. Yeah. But they would all die. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think Matt just, of everyone in this book, he's the one I want to hang out with also. He
makes spaghetti. Yeah.
He does. He's got the little jelly jar things. He plays rock music. He does kind of feel maybe a pick-me teacher. Like, he's not like other high school teachers, but I do really like him. There's just a warmth to him that I think we will continue to see King write about. Like, we'll see characters like Matt. He reminds me of a Glenn Bateman kind of character too, like where he is the fount of knowledge. But speaking of founts, let's talk about Father Callahan. So without spoiling a whole bunch, I want to talk to our resident gunslinger here. Based on what we see here, does Father Callahan deserve the second chapter that he's going to get?
So he's never been one of my favorite characters, even in this book or The Dark Tower, but I do enjoy him more. There's an appearance he makes, and I think we get a little more time with him, his history, what he does post Salem's Lot. In this, I mean, he doesn't even come in until like chapter 13, and I just feel like he feels like a little bit rushed. He's a character that could have been fleshed out more. He does get interesting, but I think like his dilemma of being torn between faith and save and all, that stuff would have been more interesting to explore. But I wonder if, not that you were censored or something, but I wonder if the time this was published, if that was sort of seen as like a bit of a taboo, was like questioning a priest's faith.
Yeah.
Whereas now we've seen so many scandals with the Catholic Church that it doesn't seem as provocative to go after that topic. And I just wonder if King maybe wrote this with one arm tied behind his back.
Well, what year did The Exorcist?
I was just thinking about that. Early 70s. So around when King was writing.
And that generated a lot of controversy, the movie as well.
Yeah. I always picture James Cromwell with Father Callahan.
Yeah, totally.
From that 2004. That is just such fantastic casting. And I will say, because I agree with you, I think Callahan looms really large over this novel, but if you actually look at the amount of time he's on the page, it's not a lot. And I think one thing I meant to ask about Matt is, I had to go back and remind myself what happens to him, because we do get an end to his story, but it almost feels like King kind of forgot and then was like, well, we got to tie this up, But Callahan gets a really devastating ending too. And I think the speech or the section of writing that I've probably referenced the most on this pod is Father Callahan talking about evil with a capital E and evil with a lowercase e. Y'all have probably heard me talk about that before, because I just think about that a lot. And so I think the way King kind of presents it here, without really giving us an answer either, he's just like, this is what I'm wrestling with, I really, really like. And I think that kind of elevates Callahan to me. But I agree with you, other than James Cromwell, like he doesn't really do as much as I think we think he does.
Yeah, to me, if anybody is kind of a fridge in some ways, it feels like Callahan's kind of a fridge. Like he's pulled out for this to play this kind of role anyways in the story, and just to really nail home this idea about like religion can fail you, and like, with all of his drinking and everything, and just playing into the idea that like, yeah, like religion, the hypocrisy in religion sometimes, and how like we look to these leaders for salvation and we look to religion for salvation, and sometimes that's maybe not necessarily what you want to do, or maybe is not going to pay you back in the way that you're expecting. And I think that Callahan, I don't mind him. I don't know if he's deserving of his second chapter. Like, would it be devastating to never see him again? For me, no. Do I also mind it? No. I think it's fine. I just think that he's kind of a vessel to sort of get King's point across, the fact that like, oh, these priests and your crosses, they're not going to provide that like simple fix that you're looking for. That sometimes there's going to be problems bigger that just trying to pray it away isn't necessarily going to, I'm trying not to be like offensive, but like that might not solve all your problems. And so you're going to have to sometimes maybe look beyond some of those rituals, look beyond some of those things, and sort of, make some changes on your own, or look inside as well as externally, look to other sources of solving these problems. And so I think that in that way, Callahan really works, but him as a character, I don't know. I could have even used maybe a little bit more of him. Like you said, we don't really get him till much later. But I do love how he does connect the dots, because at first it just feels like he's kind of dropped in there. And then it's like, no, maybe you should call this Father Callahan fellow. And I like that.
Now, I will say, by the time he has joined our quartet, where the bird is taken off for me, and I'm like, wait, we have to convince Callahan now? What the fuck? And when he's like, okay, well, let's go down and talk to him, that moment to me is always like, no, you're not getting it. Like, why are we, it feels like backtracking a little bit, although I completely understand. What do you think it is about him that makes King want to go back to him, though? Do you think it's this, he was an early addict in King's writing and King wanted to kind of play that out? Especially, like, I don't remember a ton about his later chapters, which we are all really trying to be vague about, but I remember that addiction does come into play. Do you think that's why he wants to go back to Callahan?
I think he has a better handle on his addiction by the time he's writing book 5 of The Dark Tower, right? Yeah. Because there are a few like lines from Alcoholics Anonymous in this book and like little plays on it. So I think King was aware that he had some addiction, but it wasn't until he got tons of money, and we know like he spent a lot of like the later part of the 70s and the early 80s really indulging to a level that you could not even imagine when you're a guy that's living in a trailer, right? You're kind of limited by your purse,
finances,
yeah. Pay thy poverty, not thy will, kind of thing. But I think it's an interesting concept of the alcoholic priest, and I think he plays an important role in the much later part of The Dark Tower. But here he just is kind of, it's funny because like I do really like this book, but I don't see a ton of depth to any of the characters in it. So even now when I try to think of like nice things to say about Matt or Callahan, I'm like, I enjoyed him, but I can't really tell you why. It just kind of was a nice vibe. Yeah. Whereas other characters I could really sink my teeth into and get like, I just remember we talked like 15 minutes about Tom Cullen and what an interesting person that is. Whereas like this, I'm kind of like, all right, I'll go with the flow. I'll take the vibes, but it's not, Callahan's not going to stick with me a ton after this.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I agree with you. And as I was kind of going through these characters and trying to figure out what to write about, I do think they feel a little more archetypal than some of the characters that he's really going to flesh out later. And I also agree. I don't think that's necessarily bad because they work really well as a unit together. And this, I think, is King's first quartet, and I think it works really well. And for a novel that's about 400, 500 pages, I think we do get enough depth for me to remember them. Like Mark sticks with me, Susan sticks with me for better or worse. Like it feels like they have something to them that I can kind of grip onto, even if that thing is that I think they're boring, But yeah, when you start to really dissect it, they are a little more slight. And I think part of that is because the town is taking up so much oxygen as a piece of the story. And again, none of that is bad to me. Part of what I like about this book is that it is digestible. It's not 1,100 pages,
It's like you kind of said, though, it's the town and the story are front and center here. The characters are background, whereas he's written other stories where the character is front and center and the story is almost secondary. But here I do, like I said, I think it's like a Dickensian where it's like this big town, this, our town, and just it spreads it a little too thin that you don't get enough time with each individual. Yeah. They kind of work as a collection.
Well, and one of the things that I've talked about, I struggle with The Dark Tower is because I'm just not really a visual reader. And so I have a hard time placing the characters in the story. I have a hard time remembering where we are. I even lose that a little bit with The Stand sometimes because it's just such an expanse. But here, I never do. I always see where they are. And I think there are a couple of other ones, like Needful Things is another one where I know exactly where they are. And partly it's because those stories are so familiar to me. But that tells me that it's the characters are... Again, they're part of an organism that all works really well together. Some might say a doctor would have, I don't know, things to say about it. So let's talk about Jimmy Cody. Okay, so we've got some quotes about the gruesome Cody death that he was forced to cut from a 1983 interview with Playboy. Anyway, though I wouldn't censor myself, I was censored once. In the first draft of Salem's Lot, I had a scene in which Jimmy Cody, the local doctor, is devoured in a boarding house basement by a horde of rats summoned from the town dump by the leader of the vampires. They swarm all over him like a writhing furry carpet, biting and clawing, and when he tries to scream a warning to his companion upstairs, one of them scurries into his open mouth and squirms there as it gnaws out his tongue. I loved the scene, but my editor made it clear that no way would Doubleday publish something like that, and I came around eventually and impaled poor Jimmy on the knives, but shit, it just wasn't the same. And how he would have fought for him if he was more established. This is from a 1985 interview with Cinefantastique. A question. That's a pretty grotesque movie. And then there's the famous missing scene from your novel, Salem's Lot. King says, ah. And then the questioner says, with the rats in the mouth. And King says, yeah, you're trying to ask me why I like all that awful, horrible stuff. And then the questioner says, no, not really why you like it, but why you gave in when they wanted to cut it out of Salem's Lot. And King says, well, because it was my second book, and I was afraid that if I didn't give in, then they would just say, okay, that's it. We're not going to publish this book. At a certain point, that's every writer's fear. And at the same time, it can be a writer's salvation because editors can be right as well as wrong. My editor might have been right in that case. I'm not entirely convinced of it, but I do know that if Salem's Lot had been my seventh book instead of my second, and an editor had come along and said that, I could and probably would have said, no, we're going to keep that in. We would have kept it in. Which makes me think of The Stand also, because that was his fourth book, and he was convinced to trim it down quite a bit, and then later had the weight to release it on his own terms, which, again, we talked about in our Twinners on The Stand. Do we prefer the rats to the knives, and is the editor right?
No, the editor was not right. Oh, but I guess from that argument, as far as what I'm seeing, I will say maybe there's an argument to be like, okay, we're like leaning a little too hard into like Dracula Nosferatu kind of territory, because I feel like when I think of rats, like I'm thinking of those stories specifically.
Yeah.
So maybe there's an argument to be made like, okay, that doesn't feel like, it feels like a little bit of an extension of that, just taken a step further. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely grosser and creepier, and I think it feels very much in line with King's stuff. Mm-hmm. So I kind of prefer the rats in that way, but I like it because it feels like an extension of those really familiar stories. And it's like, yeah, of course we like, he drops Dracula's name and stuff all throughout this. Like, why not just play into that even more? Like, I don't know. The knives are creepy too, but the rats I feel like almost make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think and it goes to what you were talking about earlier, that King, this being his second novel, he feels like he can't throw his weight around quite as much, whereas he's very soon given total freedom. And I was looking up, so American Psycho, if you've ever read that, there's a famous insertion of a rat in an orifice scene.
Yep.
And that came out in 91, and that was Bret Easton Ellis's third novel. You could argue that Bret Easton Ellis, especially today, he's much more contrarian and combative of a writer than King is. But it is interesting that from the 70s to the early 90s, the idea of a rat going in the mouth was too shocking. And then within 20 years, and you could argue that King kind of paved the way perhaps for some of these gross outs.
Yeah.
But it is just funny to see like the standards of, because I wouldn't think a rat, I mean, it's gross to be eaten by rats, but Rachel's right. Like there's scenes in the movies, like the Werner Herzog Nosferatu, the famous, like, what is it? The black dinner, or like, you know, the plague dinner, where there's rats crawling and nibbling on everyone. Yeah. It seems like, I don't know, the trapdoor of knives is, you could argue, almost more shocking, but
yeah.
Well, it makes less sense.
It does make less sense. And there's an impalement also elsewhere in the book, right? Isn't there with horns, or am I mixing that up?
I can't remember.
I might just be confusing Lost Boys. And isn't there a death by stereo in this one as well? No,
yeah, somebody gets sucked into a bed too.
Exactly. But yeah, I just think that is like interesting that he's reflecting on it though, and being like, yeah, I was censored. But of all the things to censor, that doesn't seem like the most shocking, but it speaks to the times, I guess.
Maybe this is why he was like, you know what, I'm going to get my fucking rats sometime, and that's why we have Graveyard Shift.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, and, you know, it was around the same era. I will say my hot take is I don't want the rats. I want the knives, because the rats are gross. This is how I feel about Tim Burton's bugs. I don't want to think about them crawling on me, not crawling in my mouth. I've forgotten about that thing from American Psycho. So, you know, thanks, Dan. No, I don't want things crawling on me. But I also agree that feels... Except for the fact that we've got Dud and his rats, that does feel very tied to Dracula. And Barlow and Straker, he doesn't really command animals in the same way in this novel, which leads me to the next people I want to talk about. Let's talk about Barlow and Straker. Scary as fuck. But who do we picture when we read? Rachel, I'm wondering what your answer is.
I hate it, but it's, I mean, Rutger Hauer.
Yep.
Sutherland.
Yes. And that, like, fantastic casting. That and James Cromwell, I think.
Yep,
and,
James Cromwell. Yeah.
Andre Braugher.
Andre Braugher.
Yeah.
Yes. Andre Braugher is a great Matt. I feel like, a lot of things, like, are good about that miniseries. Rob Lowe and Ben.
The table is set, but they don't exactly eat, you know.
Yeah. I also, like, I like imagining him as, like, Christopher Lee, you know, obviously. Like, just people that have played Dracula in that way. I don't picture the original miniseries, but I think that's because I saw that after the fact.
Yeah.
And it's a little too Nosferatu to me.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way. Like, I think it's great. I love how it is in that. But when I'm thinking of this, I am thinking about it as a separate universe outside of Nosferatu. So for me, that's not exactly what I go to. I go to more like Rutger Hauer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, come on. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Barlow speaks too. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he talks. What about you, Dan? Are you going to Hooper's?
It's funny because, like, I don't have a strong memory of the Salem's Lot movies, but I do. The character Straker, as I recall, I forgot like how much he's almost the majority with those pairing. You would think it would be the other way, but I picture him as like Leland Gaunt and just sort of this like man of sophistication. And I remember the first time I read it, just being like, "Wow, he's getting a lot of screen time." And like, where's Barlow? You know, we want Barlow. But I do remember, I think was Donald Sutherland, or did he play him?
Yeah, he played Straker in the
I think that's who I look to. It just like based on the description of the book, that's probably who I had in my mind's eye was him.
And he's having so much fun too. You know, that's one of the things that I really like about it. It's not miserable at all. It is very happy, but you know, it is miserable. Our next category, which is misery.
She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away! Slipped away! She didn't just slip away! You did it! 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 You murdered my misery!
Annie!
All right, so let's talk about the stuff that we don't like. The writing we don't like, the stuff we're not too fond of. I don't have a whole lot, but I don't think I ever need to read the Reggie and Bonnie stuff again. You know, I think I'm good there. Especially
it's hard.
Yeah, it's rough. And I don't like begrudge King for writing it because it feels, I don't know, part of me likes the fact that he is, especially in the early 70s, writing about an abusive relationship at a time when marital rape was still legal too. So I like that, and that we are clearly vilifying Reggie Sawyer too. Like, this is not a hero moment for him. He is an asshole, but it's just hard to read. And I think, you know, like, I don't even want to read parts of it as example. So
yeah, it's crazy that a shotgun in the mouth like that is acceptable, but a rat in the mouth is not. And then when he goes and like turns out his wife after as punishment, you're just like, whoa, like, and I forgot like how graphic that interaction got.
Yeah.
And it all is just, it does feel to me very much just like a plot device to be like, okay, now isn't it Barlow? Like, I'm going to run into this kid and I'm going to turn him. It's like, okay, so all of that leading up just so we could like get to this kid and people won't miss him because supposedly he was told to run off to Boston or whatever. Yeah. So it does feel like a lot of lead up to that. So I could do without that. Also, the lady and her kid.
Yeah,
like and like it's uncomfortable.
The McDougalls, that's it.
Yes, what Randy McDougal, is that the baby's name?
Randy McDougal's the baby. Yeah.
I mean, that's rough. I feel like some of these are in there to be like, okay, so the vampires, you know, sometimes bad things happen to bad people, not just bad things happening to good people. Like, some of these are bad things. And some complicated things. And like they're not, I don't know, they're not just preying on one type of person and also just like, I don't know, preying on vulnerable people in ways that make sense. Like, oh, I can make this person disappear. It kind of adds to like the cleverness of how they're operating behind the scenes because like, oh, they won't miss this person, or like this lady is horrifically abusive to her baby. So it makes sense. So that kind of like, they're using it as a disguise almost. So in that way, I like it because it does show how like, ooh, there's actually modus operandi here, but it doesn't make those scenes any easier to read.
Yeah, I remember reading this when my kids were when they were babies and having a hard time with it, because this was when I started my chronological reread, and this was, of course, the second one I got to. The part that bothers me a lot too is when she tries to feed him pudding when he's dead, and it grosses me out that it just kind of plops out of his mouth, but also it's just so disturbing and sad too, you know. Anybody else got any more misery?
I kind of hit on some of this. And I still hold this novel in very high esteem, but I do think like the pacing is a little off for me. And they talk about it's the timeline, or the time frame is a month to the day. So all of this is happening in 30 days, the falling in love, all these characters that you're meeting. And toward the end, there's like, and it's supposed to be commotion, but there's like Herbert and Harold, and they're like, Herbert, or is it Harold? And the characters are confused, but as a reader, it also kind of can confuse me a bit. And I just think that, like, yeah, like I said, the sense of urgency is not there as I would expect it now, with some of the executions being like, well, we'll get that later. And it's like, I would be terrified of being attacked in the in-between. And it seems like this style of writing harkens back to an older time where we're like, it tries to become episodic. But when you only have 30 days, it's hard to pull that off. It's just something that I did not remember since the first time I read it. But I think in the past, I also conflated it again with like the films and stuff. But going back and really taking my time this time, I was like, yeah, it's not my favorite of his. It's still up there. I still really respect it, but it's not necessarily my one I would recommend to someone, I guess.
Yeah. Any other misery? Well, let's talk about the stuff that we do really love in our next category, word processor of the gods.
And we're going to make a new rule. Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
All right, so this is one where I do have a lot, because I think, you know, I agree with you, Dan. There are some pieces where if you start to dissect them, you can start to see the seams, but the writing is not one of those places. Like, there is just maybe some of King's best writing is in this. I was thinking, I have one on page 101 that I really, really loved, especially if we're thinking about a connection to Shirley Jackson's Hill House. So let me put on my old people reading glasses. Okay. So on 101, and this is when they're delivering what we know to be Barlow's coffin. The house seemed to lean towards them as if awaiting their arrival. Hank wheeled the truck up the driveway around to the back. Neither of them looked too closely at what the bouncing headlights might reveal in the rank grass of the backyard. Hank felt a strain of fear enter his heart that he had not even felt in Nam, although he had been scared most of the time there. That was a rational fear that you might step on a Ponzi stick and see your foot swell up like some noxious green balloon. Fear that some kid in black PJs whose name you couldn't even fit in your mouth might blow your head off with a Russian rifle. Fear that you might draw a crazy Jake on patrol that might want you to blow up everyone in a village where the Kong had been a week before. But this fear was childlike, dreamy. There was no reference point to it. A house was a house. Boards and hinges and nails and sills. There was no reason to feel that each splintered crack was exhaling its own chalky aroma of evil. That was just plain stupid thinking. Ghosts? He didn't believe in ghosts, not after Nam. And then it goes on. I just think that chapter is so interesting. And it also comes after a point where they were like, they're adults. They cannot let themselves leave and say we're too afraid. Like, that just is not an option for them. What do y'all have for a word processor?
I think you have one here mentioned as well. Well, maybe. I'm not sure. But you can pick anything from this book. I swear to God. Like, there's so many really pretty sections and passages. So one that I want to talk about is from the Lot 2, when he's talking about like fall and spring and winter and stuff. It's a longer passage, but the part I really like is where he's talking about fall. And he says, the wind makes you ache in some place that is deeper than your bones. It may be that it touches something old in the human soul, a chord of race memory that says, migrate or die, migrate or die. Even in your house behind square walls, the wind beats against the wood and the glass and sends its fleshless pucker against the eaves. And sooner or later, you have to put down what you are doing and go out and see. And you can stand on your stoop or in your dooryard at mid-afternoon and watch the cloud shadows rush across Griffin's pasture and up Schoolyard Hill, light and dark, like the shutters of the gods being opened and closed. You can see the goldenrod, that most tenacious and pernicious and beauteous of all New England flora, bowing away from the wind like a great and silent congregation. And if there are no cars or planes, and if no one's Uncle John is out in the woodlot west of town banging away at a quail or pheasant, if the only sound is the slow beat of your own heart, you can hear another sound, and that is the sound of life winding down to its cyclic close, waiting for the first winter's snow to perform last rites.
Ooh, so
good writer, this King guy.
Just a little bit. You know, he may have a future.
No, I had that one as well, but I'll jump to chapter 10, lot 3.
Ooh.
Love lose lots.
Mm-hmm.
But this is when he talks sort of about like the inner darkness of the town. So the town knew about darkness.
Oh.
It knew about the darkness that comes on land when rotation hides the land from the sun. And when the darkness of the human soul, the town an accumulation of these 3 parts, which in some are greater than the sections. The town is the people who live there, the buildings which they have erected to den or to do business in, and it is the land. The people are Scotch, English, and French. There are others, of course, a smattering, like a fistful of pepper thrown into a pot of salt, but not many. This melting pot never melted very much. The buildings are nearly all constructed of honest wood. Many of the older houses are salt boxes, and most of the stores are false-fronted, although no one could say why. The people know there is nothing behind those false facades, just as they know that Loretta Starcher wears falsies. And then they start to go into like the Sunday school teacher having these secrets, and I love the idea that even like the false fronts, like the facades of the buildings are not even real, and everyone can kind of sense it, but they don't know why that is. And it just, to me, speaks to like obviously like what's going on in the town, but also just like with Barlow coming in, we're like, there's something going on, but we don't fully comprehend it. It's hidden away, whether it's only coming out at night or it's in a casket. We all get this sense that there's evil lurking underneath, but we can't even like articulate it. And I think it's just like beautiful writing.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to one that I want to read, which I kind of hinted at earlier. This is on page 450. It's right before the epilogue. Ben, he paused for a moment, looking around. The deserted business buildings with their false fronts seemed to lean crepitatingly over the street. The rain, which had started around noon, fell softly and slowly as if in mourning. The little park where we had met Susan Norton was empty and forlorn. The shades of the municipal building were drawn. A Be Back Soon sign hung in the window of Larry Crockett's insurance and real estate office with hollow jauntiness, and the only sound was soft rain. He walked up toward Railroad Street, his heels clicking emptily on the sidewalk. When he got to Eva's, he paused by his car for a moment, looking around for the last time. Nothing moved. The town was dead. All at once he knew it for sure and true, just as he had known for sure that Miranda was dead when he had seen her shoe lying in the road. I just love the end of that, like the natural conclusion to all of that, you know? Got anything else?
Literally, this whole book, like, it's so beautiful. Like, and it's hard to pick just a passage because it goes on for pages.
Right.
And anytime he's talking about this town, like, I'm just in love with it. Like, I feel like he captures it so beautifully and in such a way that does feel so authentic. Like, I'm never questioning that he knows what he's writing about.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, I'm really glad that you read that part because I was going to pull that, and I had a really hard time isolating it, like drawing it down without reading like 5 pages, you know, because it's just so good. And there's even one point where there are no period breaks either, you know.
Yeah, I kind of do a couple short ones. I usually do the pithy ones. Like I love his like folky wisdom.
Yeah.
But these are the last 2 I have because you guys got most of mine. It says, God grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the tenacity to change what I may, and the good luck not to fuck it up too often.
Love that.
It's like very early King. Which we'll see that kind of like funny, you know, sly little wink to the audience. And then the one that I think really kind of sums up really, I don't know, like the approach to how he thinks of fear. He says, the basis of all human fears, he thought, a closed door slightly ajar.
Oh, yes. I have that in Cemetery. And again, like I don't want to read the whole thing because it is a longer passage where Matt is walking up the stairs, but it is so good. And just
it's so good about the intrigue too, though. It's something about closed door is fine, but if it's slightly open, suddenly that changes things huge.
It changes the whole equation, you know. Well, and along the fear element of it, I have one more on page 403. Here's the peculiar thing. None of those awake in Jerusalem's lot knew the truth. A handful might have suspected, but even their suspicions were as vague and unformed as 3-month fetuses. Yet they had gone unhesitatingly to bureau drawers, attic boxes, or bedroom jewel collections to find whatever religious hex symbols they might possess. They did this without thinking, the way a man driving a long distance alone will sing without knowing he sings. They walked slowly from room to room, as if their bodies had become glassy and fragile, and they turned on all the lights, and they did not look out their windows. That above all else, they did not look out their windows. No matter what noises or dreadful possibilities, no matter how awful the unknown, there was an even worse thing: to look the Gorgon in the face. That's another one I come back to a lot, just that idea of they didn't look out their windows. I love it so much. Anything else in word processor? This is one where I had a really hard time deciding what was going to go in word processor and what was going to go in cemetery, because they really, really overlap in really nice ways. Before we get to the cemetery, though, I am hungry, and, you know, it's Jehubi o'clock, so let's eat some pound cake.
After all you've been taught, everyone isn't bad, Mama. Everything isn't a sin.
Come to your closet and pray. Ask to be forgiven.
He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
All right. So I was reading this thing where he meets Susan in the park. The pretty girl happens to be reading his book. I was like, that is a young king. That is an author's wet dream there. Like, I don't even need to read it, but it just is so funny. It's like that wish fulfillment thing of like, what if the pretty girl in the park was reading my book? You know, what if she thought it was cute? And then, of course, on page 66, we meet the Jehubis that we will come to know and love. Anything for pound cake?
I mean, there's a lot of little bits of pound cake in here. I know you've got one here. I don't even need to like read the whole situation, but the first time that Susan and Ben, quote unquote, make love, and it almost makes me gag when she's like, make it good.
I was like, well, what was he going to do before you said that? You know, I was just
like, no, I was going to be real bad. I was going to be real.
20 seconds, you know. I do like in that section, it kind of, hold on. It ends with, they became shadows in the dark, which I like. It's followed by, there, he said, oh, Susan. And that's, so yeah.
I had that for sure. Make it good. And I have from Monsters Ball when Halle Berry says, make me feel good. Which is a little slightly different context. I do have the dump owner drops the F word pretty liberally to describe his customers, which is a little bit outdated. But I also have when Ben is meeting, I think it's Ben, right? He's meeting with Susan's father, and he talks about how can you really be friends with the guy that's banging your daughter? Yeah. Which I think is a very kind of outdated. I mean, I don't know. I've had, you know, when I dated girls and you have to meet their father, there is like a bit of that. It's like, oh, are you good enough? But I just think hearing it explained like that, it's like, could you ever be friends with them? And you're like, well, I hope if I have father-in-law one day that we can get along. But
yeah. I don't know, Dan. Are you going to be dangling her deflowerment between your legs?
That's exactly the line, yeah.
I don't think you can be friends.
It's like, pleased to meet you. What are my plans?
Right.
And then the other part is, I think it's funny that when the one guy, I forget the name, but he gets bit by his wife and he gets an erection when he's being bit.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm just like, oh, maybe being a vampire isn't so bad.
That, I'm telling you, that was the birth of my question, would you let a vampire bite you? Because I was like, well,
I find Viagra's easier, but yeah, I don't know.
Kind of into it, you know. Yeah, but you got to pay for Viagra. Vampires.
Well, this one you pay for. With
well,
your
that's
life
true. You pay with your soul,
time.
but
you pay with your eternal soul, or you know, go to the gas station and get the rip-off one. But
speaking of Sutherland's, like Kiefer makes it look really good and hot.
That's true.
I would be into it. You know, any other pound cake?
There's a lot sprinkled.
There is.
Throughout.
There's like pimples on her ass, you know, like
there's some gross pound cake too. Yeah. There's some not appropriate pound cake too, but you know, it's fine.
It is, yeah. It's not overwhelming, and it almost kind of, it's like a pimple on the ass of a great novel, you know, too. It's kind of like we love it, flaws and all, you know. But I think the money for me here is the scary shit in this book. I do think it's one of his scariest novels. So let's talk about the scary shit in the cemetery.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
All right. I'm not going to read this, but I want to shout out Charlie on the School Bus. That freaks me out, probably because I remember seeing it in that 2004 miniseries. I think that is a really good kind of vignette there. But what do we have for Cemetery? Kind of an embarrassment of riches, you know?
I was saying when Susan's fighting with her mom, it really gave me flashbacks to Carrie and what's her name? Is it Margaret White?
Oh,
arguing, which is funny that those are the two books. Like you could tell that theme had been in his head. And I was like, oh, did King have like confrontations with his mom? You know, like that kind of mirrored some of these. But I think the way that she just gets so hateful and it ends with like a slap and like the mom almost can't process. It's like, and then just has to keep going and pushing it, just like a habitual line crosser. That stuff stresses me out because like I have a pretty good relationship with my parents and I can't imagine having to deal with what this character is going through. That would just be so awful.
Yep. One of my earlier ones in the book that I just love how it's phrased is Straker. I'll skip around a little bit, but his little prayer here where he's saying, "Oh, my father, favor me now. Lord of flies, favor me now. Now I bring you spoiled meat and reeking flesh. I have made sacrifice for your favor. With my left hand I bring it. Make a sign for me on this ground, consecrated in your name. I wait for a sign to begin your work." There was no sound but that brought on the breeze. The figure stood silent and thoughtful for a time. Then it stooped and stood with the figure of a child in his arms. "I bring you this." It became unspeakable.
Ooh. That is something that I do think the new Salem's Lot did well. This sequence is really, really horrific. And I like the way that I think it's Doberman is playing with shadows in this segment too. I think my favorite segment of this entire book is Matt on the stairs. And Dan, you kind of read the tail end of what I wanted to read, but I'm going to read a little bit at the beginning on page 222. Going up the stairs was the hardest thing Matt Burke had ever done in his life. That was all. That was it. Nothing else even came close, except perhaps one thing. As a boy of 8, he had been in a Cub Scout pack. The dim mother's house was a mile up the road, and going was fine. Yes, excellent, because you walked in the late afternoon daylight. But coming home, twilight had begun to fall, freeing the shadows to yawn across the road in long, twisting patterns. Or, if the meeting was particularly enthusiastic and ran late, you had to walk home alone in the dark. Alone, yes, that's the key word, the most awful word in the English tongue. Murder doesn't hold a candle to it, and hell is only a poor synonym. There was a ruined church along the way, an old Methodist meeting house, which reared its shambles at the far end of a frost-heaved and hammocked lawn, and when you walked past the view of its glaring, senseless windows, your footsteps became very loud in your ears, and whatever you had been whistling died on your lips, and you thought about how it must be inside, the overturned pews, the rotting hymnals, the crumbling altar where only mice now kept the Sabbath, and you wondered what might be in there besides mice, what madmen, what monsters. Maybe they were peering out at you with yellow reptilian eyes, and maybe one night watching would not be enough. Maybe some night that splintered, crazily hung door would be thrown open, and what you saw standing there would drive you to lunacy in one look. And you couldn't explain that to your mother and father, who were creatures of the light, no more than you could explain to them how, at the age of 3, the spare blanket at the foot of the crib turned into a collection of snakes that lay staring at you with flat, lidless eyes. No child ever conquers those fears, he thought. If a fear cannot be articulated, it can't be conquered, and the fears locked in small brains are much too large to pass through the orifice of the mouth. Sooner or later, you found someone to walk past all the deserted meeting houses you had to pass between grinning babyhood and gruntle senility until tonight when you found out that none of the old fears had been stoked, only tucked away in their tiny child-sized coffins with a wild rose on top. And then he goes upstairs, and I love, like, that feels like it to me. Like, really, what is fear, and what is the difference between childhood fear and adult fear?
Yeah, that's good.
Y'all have anything?
Just the description of when Susan does die, It's very gnarly. There's like explosions, the shredding of her own lips, like with her teeth. And I think like we keep talking about Lost Boys, but they say like, you know, every vampire will go down in a different way. And I think this kind of proves it, but it's like they all try to take you with them.
Yeah.
And then the final thing I just had was Barlow's letter, which I thought was really great because they know they're dealing with sort of this weird creature, you know, beyond like quasi immortal. But then when he's like, it's just like the guy has such intelligence and he's foreseeing their moves like 3 or 4 ahead, like a chess game. And the concept of him being older than the Catholic Church and just you're dealing with an entity that's so much more powerful than you could ever comprehend. And like at that point, I would probably just be like, yeah, I'm probably going to join that guy, not risk trying to like, it's just like, how does a, you know, an ant fight a giant?
I mean, of course, we have to talk about Mark in the window.
Ooh, yes.
He says something had awakened him. He lay still in the ticking dark, looking at the ceiling. A noise, some noise, but the house was silent. There it was again, scratching. Mark Petrie turned over in bed and looked through the window, and Danny Glick was staring in at him through the glass. His skin grave pale, his eyes reddish and feral. Some dark substance was smeared about his lips and chin, and when he saw Mark looking at him, he smiled and showed teeth grown hideously long and sharp. "Let me in," the voice whispered, and Mark was not sure if the words had crossed dark air or were only in his mind. He became aware that he was frightened. His body had known before his mind. He had never been so frightened, not even when he got tired swimming back from the float at Popham Beach and thought he was going to drown. His mind, still that of a child in 1,000 ways, made the accurate judgment of his position in seconds. He was in peril of more than his life. "Let me in, Mark. I want to play with you."
Ooh,
just like, I mean, it goes on and on. Like, it's all really creepy. But, I mean, that's also, like, the most iconic scene, I feel like, from, you know, from the miniseries. Or, I don't know, is that Mark when he shows up in the miniseries? Okay.
Yeah, Danny and Mark. Yeah, the window.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just so, and I like that idea that, like, his body had known before his mind, because I feel like that's a really relatable feeling sometimes too, where it's just like you feel the fear and like haven't even put all the pieces together, but you're just like, something is not right here.
Yeah,
that's the scene. Yeah, in The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 4.
The
I'd
best
seen
one.
that before I watched Salem's Lot, and it's Bart at the window tapping.
Yeah. And if you tell him you're a vampire, you get a free slushie or something
at the movie theater.
Yeah,
free small popcorn.
That's it. That is. It's Millhouse also too. And then so speaking of Danny, I have the section in the woods, and I won't read the whole thing because this is a couple of pages of just brilliance, but on page 84, the woods creaked secretively around them. The whippoorwill had ceased his cry. A branch snapped somewhere behind them, almost stealthily. The daylight was nearly gone from the sky. Every now and then, Danny went on eerily, when some ring-meat little kid comes out after dark, it comes flapping out of the trees, the face all putrid and covered with quicksand. "Danny, come on." His little brother's voice held real pleading, and Danny stopped. He had almost scared himself. The trees were dark, bulking presences all around them, moving slowly in the night breeze, rubbing together, creaking in their joints. Another branch snapped off to their left. Danny suddenly wished they had gone by the road. Another branch snapped. "Danny, I'm scared," Ralphie whispered. "Don't be stupid," Danny said. "Come on." They started to walk again. Their feet crackled in the pine needles. Danny told himself that he didn't hear any branches snapping. He didn't hear anything except them. Blood thudded in his temples. His hands were cold. "Count steps," he told himself. "We'll be at Joyner Avenue in 200 steps, and when we come back, we'll go by the road. No ringmeat won't be scared. In just a minute, we'll see the streetlights and feel stupid, but it will be good to feel stupid and count steps. 1, 2, 3, and then...
You love some counting
steps.
I
do love counting steps. I didn't intend to bring up the counting steps part, but if King is going to count steps, I'm probably going to read it on this podcast. Because I really do. Anything else? Like, I just feel like there's so much. I love the Marjorie Glick section. I'm not going to read it, but what I like about that is so much of what we have been reading is King talking about the shadows and like the building darkness, which I think is so good in this book. But what I love about the Marjorie Glick section is this is when it finally is, like, it's in the light. It's not daylight, but the lights, like, you can see it. It's really there. It's really happening. I think the Mike Ryerson section too, that's also one of the most effective parts of the new remake of the movie, also because Spencer Treat Clark is hot in it. But I think that Marjorie Glick part pays off so well because we've done so much building and so much like interrogating what the fear is and why does my body feel it before my brain understands it, you know?
Yeah, well, in the Marjorie part, like, I like that we have that because so much of the buildup is like eerie and creepy, and that just to me feels like horror.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're going all out on this, like the way she's moving and what she's saying and just sort of like how he describes her in that way. Like, that's like a big kind of like horror set piece scene is what it feels like, where everything else is like the tension and the atmosphere and the mystery and the buildup. And that's like, it feels fun in a way. Like, it's horrifying and he writes it so well, but it's also, I don't know, horror can be fun.
Yeah.
Because there's like an ominous sense of foreboding throughout this entire novel that, again, he didn't want to be typecast as like a horror writer, but this is certainly like a purely horror novel. And
absolutely.
It does not let up throughout the whole thing. It's a perfect October read, you know?
Yeah. Well, and to think about him following this with The Shining, which is also a purely horror novel and terrifying. It's just, well, yeah, you might as well just do your thing, you know, and become the master of horror.
And make millions of dollars doing it. Crazy.
Right? The part where his teeth, like, that's all that's left, and then he picks the teeth up and they start to try to, like, twist in his hand.
They're curling in his hand, and I'm like, I can't even visualize what that looks like, but he's like, they're trying to bite me, and then you're like, wait, would you technically become a vampire had they, or I guess you have to drink the blood, but that was just such a weird, I was thinking of, like, because they also have, like, not the Necronomicon, but it's almost like, what is that, like, the Book of Worms, or, it's in, like, I think Midnight Mass, but there's, like, famous evil text. And it's like bound in human skin. And I think like that stuff and like these just like worm like creatures everywhere, it just adds to the real creepiness to this.
Yeah. Another section that really freaks me out too, I'm not going to read it, is when he kills Mark's parents by just smashing their heads together. Like that's that's something that stuck with me. It's so simple, but it's so like barbaric and just awful, you know.
It's funny you mentioned that because it's like Three Stooges or in True Lies when Arnold, the two Dobermans, and he's like, he smashes them and he goes, sit or stay.
Unless except if it just like smashed your head in and then you were just dead.
Except if it was real and not
well, exactly. Yeah, not my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger right now. But I also think like the way that unfolds too, like having Mark watch his parents just all of a sudden they're gone, you know, both of them at the same time in one blow. It's just oof. And I think the Father Callahan part is when he shows up at the bus to buy the bus ticket and he's so haunted that she doesn't even recognize him. I think it's just more like ominous and eerie. And I wonder if that is kind of the moment where King was like, maybe I have more to say about this character, you know. Anything else we have in the cemetery other than just the whole thing? Because it's scary and I love it. And I think you're right. It is a really great October read. But what are our final thoughts? Let's find out in our category final thoughts.
Dad, can we go now?
You ready?
Yeah, we've been ready for an hour.
Okay, I'll be right there.
You said that a half hour ago. Yeah, my dad's weird. He gets like that when he's writing.
And so let's do our final thoughts, our MVP and our nose ranking. Rachel, what are you giving Salem's Lot, and who's your MVP?
I think my MVP is actually, I think it's Barlow. I like what we get from him. I like when he pops up and just his swagger. Like how he operates and his you know, his confidence and how he moves about. And I like thinking about Barlow and his side quests and what he's doing over in Europe and his furniture and everything. Like I love the character that we get there and that we don't get too much of him. Like I think that's really helpful. Like I think we get just enough of him and it's his actions that are fueling this whole thing, right? So I think that like I really like that character. And I really like this book. Do I think it's perfect? No. But it's also perfect, if that makes sense. I love getting lost in this world. I love how we get, like, this is where I think we really, we get some of this in Carrie too, but this is where we're really starting to see just like how King can make the familiar really dangerous and like draw all these lines and themes and parallels to other things that, like, yeah, there's vampires, but it's also like, you know, this larger exploration of just how something can infect and spread within a small town, and the, like you said, this organism of a small town and how it functions and how quickly things can fall apart, and how like your ordinary life can become changed so fast. Like we see that with the Glicks, and he even makes a point like, oh, 10 days ago this was a normal, happy family, and now everything has fallen apart. And I think that he explores that in such an interesting, thoughtful, I don't know, just empathetic but also terrifying way. And it's just beautiful. Like, this is some of like my favorite King prose, I feel like. It's dreamy. This is a dreamy book to me, where it just feels like this fall atmospheric cloud that I just love to like get surrounded in. It feels very cozy in a way. It's also scary as hell. Like, it's actually really creepy and unnerving.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a 5-noser. Just because I love returning to it again and again. And 50 years on, still I feel like relevant, and there's still a lot of fascinating things to draw from it if you want. If you want to look at it that way, or you can just enjoy it as a vampire novel, and I think that that's great.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I think I really like your point of it's 50 and it's still relevant.
Yeah.
And I think of how much influence this has had across so many genres beyond even just horror. And I had in my notes, there's 2 references here that are later used in Game of Thrones, which is another one of my favorite series. They refer to him as the Black Dread.
Yeah.
Balerion the dragon was nicknamed the Black Dread. They also say winter is coming in this novel.
Yeah.
So think of that. The Starks, arguably the main characters of the Game of Thrones series, and their motto is lifted from this book by George R.R. Martin. It's just like it pervades in so many ways. When we're talking about like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, there's like these cues in film, but also in literature that lift directly from this book. I feel like this book gave permission. It opened the door for other horror writers to go through. And it's neat that King was told, don't do this.
Yeah.
People tried to stop him, but he kind of pioneered. You know, it's like climbing Everest for the first time. Like, somebody had to do it. And then suddenly we're like, oh yeah, that is possible. Or doing a sub 4 mile. And then once it happens, the next year it happens 3 more times.
Yeah.
So I think this book, and again, it's not my favorite of his, but I'm really glad I revisited. It's a very like crucial text in his development. And I feel like it makes you appreciate so much of what came in his later works if you appreciate what came in the beginning. So I'm going to give, well, I should say my MVP is, I got to go with Straker. Because it's very valuable to have a good road agent. As they tell you in Deadwood, you have to have people go and kind of infiltrate, set things up so that when you come, it's all ready to go, Chief. And I'm going to give this 4.5 bright red Pennywise clown noses. And I was really happy to reread it. Like, I'm a much different person now than I was 19 years ago. But this book, though, remains consistent and influential in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I turned on the audiobook. It's probably maybe the 10th time I've listened to it. And it was just, it felt like coming home, you know, for the 2nd time, maybe.
Driving into town.
Yeah. I think about that. Keep Maine green, bring money. Like, there are just certain turns of phrases that I think about a lot. The town knew darkness, one of my favorite elements of it. I love the way the town is a character here. And like I've said a couple of times, this is a digestible novel. It's not overwhelming. And I just sink into it. It's so familiar. It's so comfortable. But like you said, scary as fuck. And I think, you know, we've made some good points. And Dan, I agree with you. I do think upon like really looking under a microscope, some of these characters are a little slight. But to me, that almost kind of strengthens the novel because the way they work together is so, it's just, it sings, you know. I think my MVP is going to be Salem's Law at the town. I really love the way he writes about the town here. And I think this might be, it's not overtly Halloween, but it is a perfect October read. It's so scary. I think the way he is examining fear and secrets here too, I find really interesting. And yeah, it feels very like it is its own thing. It is singular, and it does precede a whole lot of what he's going to do, but it stands on its own. You know, I think it does still really, really hold up. Like, I had a blast reading this. There are a couple of things that I need to read and listen to right now, and this is the one that I kept wanting to come back to. And like, when I had a headache, I was like, I'm gonna listen to Salem's Lot, and it's just gonna roll along, and I'm gonna love every second of it. So I'm gonna give this 5 bright red Pennywise clown noses. I think, again, it's not in my top 5 of King, it's in my top 10, but I just think it's perfectly imperfect, you know?
Yeah.
And that is it for our episode on Salem's Lot, our Twinner episode. The sun is coming up, and we need to retire to our coffins in the root cellar so we can live to record another episode. But before we close the lids, the teeth of our plugs are going to try to bite you, listeners. So, Dan, where can listeners find you, and what do you have coming up on Dark Tower Detour, and what did you just finish on Dark Tower Detour?
Oh, so we, Dan Pfleegor on most socials. It's mostly me talking about The Chair Company right now, which is like my new favorite obsession. Great show, worth checking out. For Dark Tower Detour, we're still figuring out the next episode, but I will say we ended our Summer of The Stand. We did 3 whole episodes about the Marvel comic adaptation of The Stand, and we concluded that it was the best adaptation of The Stand. It is really good. We ranked all the characters. It's really remarkable. And they go off on little jaunts of their own, or little detours. Mm-hmm. And it really adds a lot of appreciation to the characters. The artwork is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And people who haven't read the comics, we don't just do a summary of it. So it's not like you're going to sit there and have us be reading Cliff Notes. But we really get into how this came about, how the Dark Tower comics influenced it, what the works were like. And there was mentioned by the authors appropriately that they kind of want to do Salem's Lot as a comic. So we shall see.
Oh, that would be great. You know, I have Fright Night, the comic adaptation of Fright Night, and
that would be awesome. I've never read that.
Yeah, well, I haven't read it yet because it's in a case, but I have it. Rachel, where can listeners find you, and what do you have coming up?
You can find me. Let's do Letterboxd. Come on over to Letterboxd. I'm going to try to do better to actually log things when I watch them now, because I always forget to. But I love Letterboxd. It's a lot of fun. So come on over there. You can find me, Rachel Reeves, and I think it's under Vinyl Girl, GRRRL. And over on Halloweenies, we're having fun this month. It's October. So we've got a dropping on Halloween. We've got an episode where we're ranking the 31 best kills in the Halloween franchise. So we're recording that tomorrow, actually, in the pod time-space continuum. And I'm sure it's going to be not contentious at all. And we're going to totally agree. And Justo has, collated all the Gerberlytics, and I cannot wait to see how everything shakes out. So come on over to Halloweenies and check that out. Number 1, clearly, is an H2O where she is hanging from the lamp cord. In her leg. Well, Mike is on that episode, and you know how he feels about H2O and Resurrection, so I'm not sure, but we'll see.
Evil dies tonight.
That's true, yeah. Maybe that is the number 1 death, is when Evil dies that night,
I mean, how can it not be?
Right? Exactly.
It's dead. Evil's gone.
Evil is dead, yes. You can find me at Jenn Ferratu. I can't remember if I said this before we started recording or not, but I just watched Wicked today because that's what we're about to talk about on Lady Killers. I have cajoled Rachel into finally watching it, and that is going to transition us out of witch month into musical month, so it's going to be fun times. And then on Murder Made Fiction, we're talking about The Monster of Florence. We just finished up talking about Ed Gein and John Wayne Gacy, so it's been a lot of really brutal serial killers. But we also are talking about The Perfect Storm and water disaster, so that'll be fun too.
Oh, fun.
And then on Girls on the Boys, we are back at VOT talking about Gen V. And you can find all of that if you follow me at Jenn Ferratu. And for the Losers Club, we are going back to Derry because Welcome to Derry is about to premiere. I've seen a couple of episodes and I was very into it. I am enjoying it a lot more than I thought I was going to. And
Nice.
so we are going to be doing episode by episode coverage of that. So that's going to be fun. And then not totally sure what we're going to be doing in the Barrens coming up. We're going to have our meeting to decide it tomorrow. But if you want to go back and find that, not only the Dark Tower detour that Dan was talking about, but also that kids bracket, if you want to find out who ends up on top there, all of that's there. There's like a ton of episodes. So join us in the Barrens. And that's our episode on Salem's Lot. I think we're going to, I don't even want to say what the next Twinner episode is going to be because I will get too excited. But yeah, we are going to continue doing these Twinner episodes because they're really, really fun. And I like looking at the legacy of things, But yeah, Derry and Running Man is coming too. So, let's run and sign off with long days and pleasant nights.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
You've made it to the end of another bloody, disgusting podcast. Congratulations. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody, disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, and more.